Maids, a-Meddling, a Christmas novella, Shady Grove Psychic Mysteries, Book 9.5, written by Ada Bell, narrated by Liza Jacob. Chapter 1. As much as I loved my life in Shady Grove, New York, there was no place like home. To me, home meant Sacramento, California, where I was visiting my parents for the holidays. Home was Mexican food, temperate winters, and Mom's amazing snickerdoodles, which currently taunted me from a tin on my lap. Even through the metal lid, they gave off a tantalizing odor. Lifting the lid slightly, I peeked inside. Did you know in Shady Grove, it's traditional to gift people 23 cookies instead of 24? Sometimes 22 for a really good friend. My mom snorted without taking her eyes off the road. Nice try, Allie. We're taking a full 24 cookies to Lottie. You're free to wheedle them out of her during rehearsal. The word rehearsal struck fear in my heart, even though I wasn't participating in the event. As part of the Holly Jolly Jamboree, an annual Christmas festival in a neighboring town, the event organizer, who happened to be Mom's best friend, convinced my mother to perform the 12 days of Christmas throughout the event. She would appear as Mary Maid number 3, one of the 8 maids a-milking. After my last experience, the mere thought of performing in a play gave me hives. Today was the final rehearsal before the event started tomorrow, so Lottie planned to watch. She and Mom asked me to come give tips on the blocking and sound. I'd agreed only because I'd known Lottie since I was in diapers. Everyone adored her. Also, the cookies. Mom turned into the nearly empty lot and parked near the entrance to the fairground. Considering how busy this place got during the festival, it felt wrong not to walk half a mile from the car to the front gate. Tomorrow, residents from all over would flock to the makeshift Santa's Village for merriment and family fun, including hot cocoa, a reindeer petting zoo, pictures with Santa, and more. The Holly Jolly Jamboree began about 30 years ago, and the comfort of familiar traditions kept the community coming back. Mom opened the car door. Brr, it's cold today. In response, I snorted. After spending the past 2 winters in freezing Shady Grove, I'd come home for the holidays with a selection of t-shirts, flip-flops, capri pants, and one warm-ish sweater, still at the bottom of my suitcase. I should have brought walking shoes, though. This place was huge, and my feet would protest after a couple of hours. We got out of the car and walked toward the entrance, 2 closed ticket booths on either side of a large opening in the trees. The metal awning overhead welcomed me to the fairground. But nothing about the area said Christmas festival to me. My hometown had seen a white Christmas approximately once in my almost 23 years. White meaning a small dusting of approximately 12 flakes. The average daily high was in the 40s or 50s this time of year. I'd left my hat and scarf in the back of my car at the airport. This is a winter wonderland? I asked dubiously. Use your imagination, she said. Everything will be ready before we leave tonight. The stable is being filled with reindeer as we speak. The excellent staff is experienced at putting everything up quickly. Try imagining Christmas lights, Scrooge. Bah, humbug, I said, but smiled. Although I enjoyed giving my mother a hard time, I loved the Holly Jolly Jamboree. We'd been talking about it and visiting Lottie for weeks. Closing my eyes, I pictured what Mom described. With a little, well, a lot of fake snow, lights, and decorations, this place would be perfect. I could almost see a dozen excited kids lined up to tell Santa what they wanted for Christmas, dancing in place and craning their necks for signs of Rudolph. It's going to be beautiful. Told you, she said. Now, come on, we're late. To my surprise, she turned away from the entrance, walking toward an opening in the trees about 300 feet away. "Where are we going?" I asked. "I thought the stage was through the main entrance." "It is." Mom pointed ahead of us. "Lottie's got a motorhome parked at the campground." "Isn't she at the rehearsal?" "She's supposed to be," Mom said. "But Karen, Mary Maid #1, texted while we were in the car. No one has seen Lottie in a couple of hours, and she's not answering her phone. Karen asked us to swing by Lottie's RV before heading over." "Maybe she decided not to go," I shrugged. "You do the show every year. It doesn't change much, does it?" "It's been essentially the same for about 10 years, but Lottie always watches the final rehearsal. She loves the show, and she's too busy once the jamboree starts." I followed Mom to a small motorhome that wasn't noteworthy other than the wreath someone had hung on the front door and a "ho, ho, ho" doormat outside. A few other vehicles, ranging from brand new and top of the line to older than me, were scattered in a half circle around several picnic tables and fire pits. Lottie didn't live here all year. She was usually on the road, traveling from one event to the next. A part of me envied the freedom of her nomadic lifestyle. The rest of me worried about paying my bills. My psychic abilities only showed me the past, never the future, and I'd worry all the time without a steady job. Once I finished grad school, I planned to get a full-time job in my field and always know where my next paycheck was coming from. Mom mounted the metal steps, calling Lottie's name. At the top, she knocked loudly on the door. It remained shut. I checked the windows, but the mini blinds blocked any signs of movement. Mom frowned. "This is odd." She pulled out her phone and dialed. Cocking my head toward the door, I listened for a ringtone inside. Nothing. After 4 rings, the call rolled to voicemail. "It doesn't sound like anyone is in there," I said. "Are you sure she's home?" "I'll text Karen again." A moment later, she shook her head. "The rest of the cast is by the stage, but no one's heard from Lottie. This isn't like her. Something's wrong." "Maybe she got distracted. Running the festival is a big responsibility. She must be incredibly busy." "Lottie is never too busy to tell someone she's running late." She knocked again, louder, calling Lottie's name. When the door remained shut, she twisted the knob. Locked. Mom glared at the door like she wanted to kick it. After a moment, she shook her head and stepped away. Then she turned back toward me and beckoned. "Come on." "Are we leaving?" "Of course not. There's another door on the other side." "And you have a key?" "I don't need a key. I have you." She moved around the front of the RV, taking me to the driver's door. This one had a set of buttons below the handle. Suddenly, I had a bad feeling about this detour. "Open it." I looked at her with wide eyes. "You want me to break into Lottie's RV? We could get arrested." "Don't act coy with me," she said. "I know you can do it. Your brother told me you've used your powers to break into buildings before. I'd be appalled if I weren't so proud." Stupid Kevin. My cheeks grew warm, but I ducked my head with pleasure. "It doesn't always work. I haven't seen Lottie in years, and I need a clear visual image." "Close your eyes," Mom ordered. "I'll describe the way she looks now. Lottie is 54 years old, full of life and sharp as a tack. She has black hair to her waist, clear blue eyes, and skin that never tans. Remember?" As she spoke, the picture of Lottie formed in my mind. She always wore long sleeves, even in the summer, to avoid burning. It made sense that she lived on the road most of the year, chasing cooler weather during the summer before coming back to Sacramento for the winter. Mom continued speaking, but I no longer needed her. Usually my visions picked up on strong emotions, but I discovered a little over a year ago that I could also pick up energy from places, like keyboards and keypads that got extensive use by the same individuals. Those small psychic impressions built up with each touch. Knowing the person wasn't essential, but it helped. Keeping my eyes closed, I reached for the keypad. Instantly, I saw another hand, one paler than mine, with longer fingers and dark green nail polish, pushing the buttons. Opening my eyes, I repeated the sequence and the door clicked open. I stepped back to let Mom take the lead. She knew the layout of the RV, and Lottie would be less freaked about my mother popping into the house unexpectedly than anyone else. "Lottie?" she called, sticking her head inside. Still no response. She turned to me. "Go back to the main door and I'll let you in. There's no point in both of us crawling over the driver's seat, even if you are younger and more nimble than me." Ha! Younger, sure, but Mom had been doing yoga since before my older brother was born. Of the two of us, I was more likely to hurt myself climbing inside a vehicle. Happily, I walked back around the RV. A moment later, the main door swung open and I stepped into the world's smallest kitchenette. It was clean, though, and completely modern. Whatever I'd expected to find decorating a mobile home, it wasn't gray-painted cabinets, probably fake, marble counters, and white and gray tile floors. A cozy-looking dining nook sat beside the kitchenette, and Lottie had stuck a Christmas tree between it and the wall. I wondered what went there the rest of the year. Then again, knowing how much Lottie loved Christmas, the tree could be a permanent fixture. The cockpit sat to my right, and a couch ran from the left side of the door to the far wall. Christmas lights outlined the windows and door frames. Decorations crammed every windowsill. The place was bigger than I'd expected, and Lottie had made the space her own. If I entered 1,000 homes, I'd recognize her energy instantly. I'd taken less than a step into the interior before concluding Lottie wasn't here, so Mom headed toward what I assumed must be a bedroom. Half a step inside the door, Mom screamed. I screeched to a halt to avoid walking into her. Unfortunately, with my nose 3 inches from her red and green patterned sweater, I couldn't see anything. "What's wrong?" Small sounds came from her throat, but it wasn't until Mom moaned and dropped to her knees that I saw what had upset her. Lottie lay on the floor beside the bed, unmoving. Chapter 2. My heart pounded in my throat. The cookie tin tumbled out of my hands, landing on the carpet. I raced past Mom to Lottie and started searching for a pulse. Then I saw Lottie's face and knew it was useless. She was gone. "What happened?" Mom moaned behind me. As I sat back on my heels, my hand brushed against something hard. Without thinking, I picked it up. When the gun came into view, I realized what must have happened. Someone had shot Mom's best friend, and I'd just put my prints on the murder weapon. With a cry, I snatched back my hand as if the metal burned. Then I turned toward Mom, who remained where she'd fallen. "I'm so sorry." She burst into tears. For a moment I froze. Then instinct took over, and I put my arms around her. She sobbed into my chest. As devastating as Lottie's death was, seeing Mom like this broke my heart even more. We stayed like that for a long time. To keep from freaking out, I recited the elements of the periodic table. It wasn't until Mom joined in on my second time through that I realized I'd been naming each element out loud. After several minutes, she sat up and wiped her eyes. "We need to call someone." I pulled out my phone. "I'll do it. Maybe you should get some water." She nodded, but never took her eyes off her friend. Standing, I unlocked my phone with one hand. Before I could dial, a squeak outside the room caught my attention. We looked around, but the bedroom door had swung shut when I rushed to Lottie's side. We'd have to get up and open it before investigating. I couldn't place the noise until it happened again, followed by a bang. The squeal must have been hinges, because the second noise was unmistakably a door closing. Mom's head shot up, revealing surprise that mirrored my own. Since moving to Shady Grove, I'd encountered more than my fair share of death, but the killer had always been long gone when I'd arrived. The timing of this new arrival made me wonder if the killer had returned. Maybe they'd been nearby and saw me and Mom enter, so they followed, either to get rid of the witnesses or to accuse us of doing the deed. We could be in danger. I forced myself to take a deep breath. Panicking wouldn't help. Mom was counting on me. With one finger to my lips, I made the shh gesture. She nodded. Quickly, I scanned the room for an exit. The bed took up most of the space. The only door led back to the main living area. The intruder would spot us the second we opened the door. There didn't appear to be a closet, and the bed perched on top of dresser drawers, so we couldn't hide beneath it. The new arrival hadn't made a sound other than the door, which made me worry they didn't have a legit purpose in the RV. Why were they so quiet? Why weren't they calling for Lottie, letting her know they were here? The whole thing made me anxious to get out before they reached the bedroom. Windows lined the walls. They weren't big, but I might be able to fit through if I squished. I'd read once that a person could fit their entire body through any opening that would fit their head. Maybe we were about to learn if that was true. However, the door was on the same side as the windows nearest us. If we went out that way, the intruder would see us. Going out the far windows meant climbing over Lottie. Mom followed my gaze, her eyes widening. She looked back at me and mouthed, "No way." I squeezed her hand, trying to ignore the sadness welling inside me. "You can do it." She nodded. Footsteps sounded in the hall. Before we could move, the door swung open. A man about Lottie's age, with a curly gray beard, bushy eyebrows, and faded work jeans appeared in the doorway. I'd never seen him before. When he saw me and Mom next to Lottie's body, he shouted, "Get away from her!" "It's not what it looks like," I began. "What did you do to Lottie?" the man yelled, ignoring me. Mom and I moved backward, but there wasn't anywhere to go. The back of my knees hit the nightstand tucked between the bed and the wall. Mom stood barely a hair's width away. She lifted her purse in self-defense. "Stop! My daughter is a black belt!" Despite the tension, a laugh escaped me. I'd taken about 6 months of self-defense classes, none of which helped when someone I didn't want to hurt stood between me and the attacker. Ignoring us, the man dropped to his knees beside Lottie. "Don't touch her," I said. "You could contaminate the evidence." What I didn't say was that, for all we knew, this man killed Lottie and was touching things to explain his DNA at the crime scene. We had no reason to trust him. As ridiculous as it sounded, part of me still believed Mom and I were next. My adrenal response to finding Lottie put me in fight or flight mode, and my brain couldn't process information the way it normally did. Even knowing my jumbled thoughts didn't make sense, I couldn't think rationally. The man asked again. "What did you do to her?" "We just found her a minute ago. We're as shocked as you," I said. Mom let out a sob. Tears streamed down her face. Instead of speaking, she shook her head as if trying to erase the scene in front of us. "You found her, sure. Who are you people?" "She was my oldest friend," Mom whispered. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" I demanded. "I'm on the festival committee, in charge of Santa's workshop, and I came to talk to Lottie about the event. This morning she visited us to check on the village construction. I showed her around, we discussed the train that brings visitors over to our clearing, and we reviewed a map of the whole route. Then she left. Alive." The man rose unsteadily and backed up, bumping into the wall. If he thought Mom and I had killed Lottie, he couldn't have done it. But what if he was acting? Most employees didn't go to their boss's house instead of texting or emailing, especially at a big event with hundreds of workers. "Why did you want to talk to her?" I asked. "None of your business, little girl," he sneered. Nothing made me exit a conversation like someone calling me little girl. Every minute we didn't call the police became more suspicious. We delayed long enough. I spent about 10 seconds searching for my phone before realizing it was still in my hand from when I pulled it out earlier. After dialing 911, I explained what happened and gave directions to Lottie's RV. When I finished, I said, "The police will be here soon. They asked us to stay and give a statement. All of us. I'm Connie Reynolds, and this is my daughter, Allie," Mom said. Lottie and I met almost 40 years ago. I would never hurt her.
Clint. Same. Not 40 years, but the other thing.
The poor man looked like he'd been hit with a 2x4.
I can't believe this. I've got to make some calls, but don't touch a thing. I know where everything belongs in here, and I'll see if you take stuff.
In my daze, it didn't occur to me to ask why he was so familiar with Lottie's home, until the door closed behind him. Mom went into the bathroom to collect herself, so I retreated to the main room. The Christmas decorations that seemed so bright and vibrant when we arrived made my stomach churn. I paused, forcing myself to focus on each individual item in front of me until I could rein in my emotions and think more clearly. A shelf in front of the windowsill displayed a bunch of snow globes. They weren't big, but they were heavy. I tested one in my hand while looking at the others. The globe nearest me contained a bird in a tree, which seemed odd until I realized another one contained 5 golden rings. Only 11 total, though. A lump grew in my throat at the thought of Lottie never finishing her collection. Opening the outside door, I examined the ground for footprints. Lottie had parked the motorhome on a large patch of gravel. Beyond that, a grassy area connected all the spaces. In the middle, Clint sat at one of the picnic tables. It hadn't rained in weeks, and the lawn was sparse this time of year, making it difficult to guess what should have been grass versus an intended path. This wasn't the way to catch the killer. It was impossible to distinguish one footprint from the others. I couldn't even see Clint's marks in the dust, and he wore pointy-toed cowboy boots. When he noticed me checking out his shoes, he glowered. The look made me shiver, so I pulled the door closed. Not knowing what else to do, I returned to Lottie's bedroom. Other than her prone form, it contained only the bed and the nightstands on either side. The table against the far wall was bare. The closer one held a lamp and a piece of paper. Hold on. When my brain registered what I'd seen, I turned back to the nightstand. A single page of off-white stationery with wildflowers on the side lay in the middle. The top said, "From the desk of Charlotte Wilder." Without touching it, I leaned down. Blue ink covered the page, the same sprawling, almost childlike script that graced many birthday cards to my family over the years. A printed line at the bottom reminded me to plant the letter when I finished with it, allowing seeds in the paper to grow. The message was so like Lottie. I blotted a tear before it dropped onto the page. "What are you looking at?" Mom asked from the doorway. I closed my eyes for a moment, willing the words in front of me to change. Desperately, I wanted the note to say anything else. When I read the letter, my voice cracked. "I'm so sorry. I can't go on like this. It's too hard. Please know I'll always love you. Love, Lottie." Mom gasped and slumped against the wall.
"No, that's impossible."
Behind her, Clint said,
"Can I see?"
Until he spoke, I'd been so caught up in my discovery I didn't realize he'd returned to the RV. I gestured him over but reminded him not to touch the paper until the police dusted it for evidence. Clint read the note over my shoulder, his lips moving over each word before finally looking up. His eyes glistened.
"It's a suicide note."
Chapter 3. This couldn't be happening. There had to be a mistake. I'd known Lottie my whole life. She was vibrant, full of life, happy. But the words on the page were clear. I had reached the same inescapable conclusion before Clint spoke, but refused to believe it. After we read the letter again, I took Mom outside for some air. She didn't need to be in the room with Lottie's body. Clint followed, although he leaned against the side of the motorhome rather than joining us at a picnic table. Mom sagged onto the bench, dropping her head onto her hands. Suicide. During my childhood, Lottie was always around. She'd been larger than life, the fun mom figure way better than my actual mother. For ages, I was jealous of her daughter, Alexa, for not having as many rules and restrictions. But it wasn't just her leniency. Lottie's vibrant personality and outgoing persona made her a joy to be around. My heart ached when I realized I'd never see that smile again. How did this happen? It had been years since I saw Lottie, but Mom and I talked all the time. She'd never mentioned that her friend was having problems. Sure, some people kept their feelings locked inside. Smiles could mask a person's pain, but Lottie did yoga and went to therapy and never seemed upset about anything. Never would I have thought anything could bother Lottie enough to take her own life. Although tears streamed silently down my cheeks, I didn't voice these thoughts. None of it would make Mom feel better, and my first priority was to take care of her. Approaching sirens alerted us to the police's arrival. A moment later, a car skidded to a halt outside the trailer park entrance, and 2 officers got out, leaving the light bar flashing. The driver, a woman who looked a few years older than me, surveyed the parking lot before she met the eyes of her partner, an older man with gray-brown hair, wearing a suit jacket and slacks. They nodded at each other and walked in together. The man pulled out a badge, unnecessary since we'd watched them pull up.
Is one of you Allie?
That's me. I raised my hand before standing awkwardly. This is my mom, Connie. We found her. The female officer gazed around. Which vehicle? When I pointed, my hand shook. Do you want me to take you inside?
That won't be necessary,
the man said. His gentle voice sounded so much like my grandfather's, I suddenly wanted to eat peppermints and listen to him read a story.
I'll go in first. Detective Cooper has some questions for each of you. The coroner will be here soon.
At the word coroner, Mom flinched. The woman who must be Detective Cooper smiled at me. She looked relaxed, but her eyes darted around, taking in every detail. I bet if I asked her to close her eyes and describe the entire clearing from memory, she could do it. I'd been sitting there 10 minutes, and I barely knew what color the picnic tables were. She sat across from me and pulled out a recorder, placing it on the flat surface.
You don't mind if I tape our conversation, do you? I don't want to miss anything.
I shrugged. Doesn't matter. I told the 911 operator everything, and that's recorded.
Do you know the woman who lives here?
Lottie, yeah, she's my mom's best friend, I said, tilting my head in her direction. I've known her my whole life.
Someone killed her,
Mom said, her voice low. Detective Cooper said,
We've barely had a chance to look at the scene, so let's not jump to conclusions just yet. Detective Daniels will make sure no stone is left unturned. Now, what are you doing here?
After Mom explained today's visit, Detective Cooper asked us to tell her what happened from the moment we arrived at the parking lot until they showed up. We went through each detail, conveniently omitting how I unlocked the RV. Mom made it sound like she knew Lottie's passcode, and Detective Cooper didn't ask. By the time we'd finished our story, Detective Daniels had returned from the RV and introduced himself. Then he sat at the table to the right of ours, where Clint had been waiting.
Where did you go after the 2 of you parted ways earlier?
Detective Daniels asked him.
I stayed at Santa's workshop,
he said.
There's a lot of work before the festival opens. Or there was, anyway. Now it doesn't seem important. Did anyone else see you there?
He shrugged.
Probably. There are dozens of people milling around. Did they notice me? That's the question.
Detective Daniels made a note.
What are you doing here, Mrs. Reynolds?
His question surprised me since Detective Cooper already asked, but maybe they wanted to see if our story stayed consistent.
I'm in the skit they're doing as part of the Holly Jolly Jamboree, Mom said. There are 8 of us, called the Merry Maids, and we sing the 12 Days of Christmas. We had a rehearsal scheduled for this morning.
Mom said.
One of the other women told me Lottie hadn't shown up yet and wasn't answering her phone. It seemed odd. Does she usually pick up when you call? Always. What about you?
He asked me. I came with Mom, I said. We made cookies for Lottie. Actually, I dropped them in the bedroom. You probably saw the tin. He made a note.
What kind?
Does it matter?
Probably not, but what if we find 2 tins of cookies in there and one turns out to be poisoned?
I'm pretty sure the gunshot killed her, I said. But we brought snickerdoodles.
A fine choice.
There had to be something else that would help them. I hadn't noticed the video doorbell on the RV, so we couldn't see who had entered. But what about the trailer park? Cameras, I blurted. Security videos. Detective Daniels raised an eyebrow.
Yes?
Are there cameras at the park entrance? Maybe you can see when Lottie came home and who entered after her.
I've got someone on it back at the station.
Right. I nodded. What about the gun? Can you trace it to the owner?
It was hers,
Mom said softly.
Lottie kept it in the glove box for protection. Guess it didn't work.
Detective Daniels studied her for a moment.
Are you sure it was hers?
She showed me when she got it, but I don't have extensive knowledge of guns, if that's what you're asking. It could be a similar piece.
Thanks. We'll check on that.
He made a note.
Do you know anyone else who would have had access to the glove box?
Anyone in the RV, Mom said. I don't believe she locked the compartment.
How many people would know to look? Other than you, did she tell people when she got a gun?
If she did, they probably wouldn't admit it now, I pointed out. Clint, did you know about the gun?
Yeah,
he said.
I asked her once if she felt safe, living out here alone. We're 10 minutes from anything.
Mom shot Detective Daniels a triumphant look.
See?
He patted her shoulder in a way he probably didn't mean to be patronizing, but it made me want to kick him in the shins.
We'll examine all the possibilities. Don't worry about it. Did either of you touch anything in there?
Well, the cookies, like I said. I picked up one of Lottie's snow globes from the windowsill.
Did you break it?
It took me a minute to realize why he asked. No, but I noticed one was missing.
You've got a good eye,
he said. My cheeks grew warm as another thought occurred to me. I'd been in such a state of shock since we arrived, I'd almost forgotten. I, might have touched the gun by mistake.
You. What?
I'm so sorry. When we walked in, I ran over to see if she was okay. It was a tight space. When I kneeled beside her, my hands brushed against something. The gun was right next to the bed, and I didn't notice until it was too late.
I get it, but that's unfortunate.
He sighed and shook his head.
I'm going to need you to come down to the station and give your prints so we can separate them. A DNA sample, too, if you touched the body.
At least he didn't consider me a suspect. No problem. I'm happy to help in whatever way I can. We want to find the person responsible. Mom spoke up. I'll drive her over whenever you want. My thoughtlessness made me want to kick myself. Not just touching the murder weapon in the first place. That was an accident. Understandable given how shocked we'd been. But since my prints were on the gun anyway, I should have picked it up and tried to have a vision to tell me who killed Lottie. I consoled myself with how much worse this would be if Clint had found me holding the gun when he arrived. It would be impossible to find out what really happened from inside a jail cell. In Shady Grove, I'd assisted the police in solving several murders and a town mystery lasting more than 25 years. Okay, fine. That one was mostly my friend Emma, but I helped. There had to be something I could do now. Did anyone see what time Lottie left the fairground? I asked, desperate for information. Detective Daniels said,
I know you want to help, but the best thing you can do is stay out of our way. We'll find out what happened. That's our job. All you can do right now is give us your fingerprints.
He stepped aside and pulled out his phone, but turned his back before speaking so we couldn't hear what he was saying. It didn't matter. We'd been dismissed. Come on, Mom. We might as well go to the police station now and get out of the detective's way. She nodded and rose like a zombie. Are you okay to drive? Wordlessly, she held out her purse. I took it, and after stopping to tell Detective Cooper where we were going, we headed for the car, arm in arm. Getting fingerprinted was quick and painless. It took me longer to find the police station in this unfamiliar town, even with GPS, than to give them my samples. Before long, Mom and I headed back to the fairground. I'd offered to take her home to rest, but she staunchly refused. The merry maids depended on her, she insisted, and she couldn't disappear now. When she said that, I realized that the cast of the show might still be waiting by the stage for Mom to appear for rehearsal. Had anyone called them? In the stress of the moment, I'd completely forgotten that 7 other women were waiting for us and Lottie. Surely someone would have said something. Clint also worked at the festival, and he'd been on the phone before the police arrived. The cast needed to know what happened. Man, what was it with me and shows? Maybe I was cursed. First the college play, now this. On our way out of the police station, Detective Cooper joined us in the hallway.
I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you, I said. Do you know what happened, Detective?
Please, call me Janine. Detective feels so formal, she said. A preliminary investigation shows that she died of a close-range gunshot wound to the head. We found a gun nearby, and there's a suicide note on the nightstand. I'm sorry to say this, but the evidence suggests Lottie took her own life.
That stupid note. I hadn't mentioned it because there was no way Lottie would kill herself, but of course they'd found it.
That wasn't a suicide note, Mom said.
Detective Daniels joined us.
Did you read it? I did. I'm surprised you didn't realize this was self-inflicted.
We shook our heads. Mom said,
Lottie loved Christmas. She loved the festival. This was the happiest time of the year for her. I'd be more likely to believe she took her own life after the festival ended than immediately before. A lot of people get depressed around the holidays, Detective Cooper said. Not Lottie.
Detective Daniels' condescending smile set my teeth on edge.
Don't beat yourself up. Often, our friends and family are the last to know when something is bothering us.
You misunderstand, Detective. I don't believe it happened that way. I think someone killed Lottie and staged the scene to throw us off track, Mom said softly. There's no way Lottie killed herself. I won't believe it.
I know it's hard to accept, but all the doors were locked when you arrived. Remember?
Are there tests you can run? I asked. Can you swab her hands for gunshot residue?
There's no need. We know what happened. Her gun was beside her.
Please, Janine, Mom said. How would you feel if your best friend was found dead, cut down in the prime of life? After a long moment, the detective sighed and looked at me.
She's good. You must not have gotten away with anything as a kid.
Oh, I was a dream child, I said with a perfectly straight face. I never did anything I wasn't supposed to. Growing up, Mom always seemed to know what my brother and I were up to. I'd been mystified my whole life, not understanding how she did it, until Kevin told me we'd inherited our psychic powers from our mother.
For months, I'd thought that explained everything. Mom's power was similar to mine, though. It only worked with antiques. Turned out, she knew what we were doing because she'd set up nanny cams. Right. Perfect. Mom's lips twitched, the first time she'd formed anything resembling a smile since we'd entered Lottie's mobile home. The pieces don't fit. All I'm asking is that you take a closer look. We've looked at everything, Detective Daniels said. What happened? You were happy to investigate back at the RV, I said. Did you decide on the way back to the station that you no longer felt like serving and protecting? That was before we read the note and put everything together, he shot back. Now, the answer is clear. When Janine spoke, her voice grew gentle. It might help to talk to a grief counselor. Mom's face twisted into an expression of pure disgust. Then she shook her head and stormed out of the police station. She didn't pause until I caught up with her at the bottom of the steps leading to the parking lot. Are you okay? I asked. This isn't right. Lottie wouldn't kill herself. I absolutely know it. Someone killed her. Why would anyone kill Lottie? I asked. I don't know, she wailed. But please believe me, we need to figure out what happened. Did you have any visions in her RV? Nothing, I'm sorry. Then we're going back, Mom announced. If the police don't want to investigate Lottie's death, we will. What are you talking about? The case is closed. I didn't like it either, but the detectives had been clear. They said, based on their evidence, it looks like suicide. So we'll find more evidence. Come on. Chapter 4. When Mom and I returned to Lottie's motorhome, the police were gone. They'd put crime scene tape around the vehicle, but that didn't slow us down. We needed to find out what happened to Lottie, and the best place for me to have a useful vision was where she died. After checking to make sure no one was watching, we ducked under the tape and input the code on the driver's door again. My fingerprints were already there anyway. Then we slipped back inside the RV. To my great relief, the coroner had taken Lottie away. It was easier to move forward when we didn't have to see her and think about what happened. Right now, having a purpose motivated me. We could be sad later. The police had removed the gun and the note on the nightstand before leaving. Someone also took the cookies, I noted grumpily. Police officers who refused to investigate a murder didn't deserve treats. The thought of Lottie's killer going free made me sick to my stomach. If I'd used my powers, I might have immediately identified them. The shock of finding Mom's best friend dead overrode my analytical nature. And now it might be too late. While Mom searched the bedroom for overlooked evidence, I paced the small living area. In the past, I'd been able to use my powers to obtain a confession on a few occasions. If there was any way to get the truth, I planned to find it. Unfortunately, I barely knew where to start. In the cases I'd investigated, the victim was an acquaintance of mine or a total stranger, which made it easier to remain detached and logical. Grief overwhelmed me. We had no evidence, no motive, no opportunity, no way to know who did this. This wouldn't help anyone. I needed to calm down and approach the problem analytically. WWND. What would Newton do? First, he wouldn't let his emotions overwhelm him. Second, he would form a hypothesis and test it using the scientific method. The same process that helped me solve several mysteries in the past 2 years. Got me a bachelor's degree in biology and helped me maintain my straight A average in my master's courses. I could do this, not just for me or Mom, but for Lottie. Closing my eyes, I took a deep breath and recited the elements of the periodic table. That always centered me, and this time was no exception.
By the time I got to the final element, Oganesson, I no longer worried I might collapse. Okay, think. Hypothesis 1. Lottie's death was not a suicide. To prove my hypothesis, I needed to know how she died. The news was filled with stories about people who tried to make a homicide look like a suicide or an accident. Until I ruled out every alternative suspect, I refused to accept the possibility of Lottie taking her own life. Who knew she had a gun besides Clint? More importantly, who would use it against her, and why? We needed to retrace Lottie's steps. When did she die? Lottie didn't show up for rehearsal, but Clint said she'd been at work that morning. When did she leave? Why? Who had she spoken with? What meetings or appointments did she have? Knowing how much time passed between when she left the fairground and we arrived was crucial in narrowing down the time of death. Moving to the bedroom door, I asked Mom, "Do you see Lottie's cell phone? When we called earlier, I didn't hear it ringing." "Neither did I," she said. "And no, I haven't." She could have left it on silent, but where did the phone go? Did you check her purse? Now that I thought about it, I couldn't remember seeing the bag either, but we hadn't been looking. We poked around, but eventually we reached the same conclusion. Either the police had taken Lottie's purse for evidence, or the killer walked out with it. "Do you think whoever killed Lottie took her phone?" Mom asked. "Wouldn't that make it look less like a suicide?" "The only reason is if there was something incriminating on that phone, and they didn't have time to delete or the knowledge to unlock it." "Right. The phone will contain a wealth of information. Who she spoke with this morning, text messages, location data, all kinds of stuff. At a minimum, it would give us some direction." "Can't the police pull the records without the actual phone? I've seen it on TV." "They can pull the records, but they won't without a good reason. We need to give them one." With a sigh, I shook my head. "Her phone was synced with her computer. You might get her schedule from that." "Where would that be?" The tiny space was tidy, and there weren't many hiding places. The dinette table seemed the most obvious location for a computer, but it was bare. "In her office. It's near the fairground entrance." "I'll check." Hopefully, the information contained on the computer would tell me not only who Lottie saw before her death, but why they might want to kill her. At the moment, I was coming up empty. Lottie's husband passed away several years ago, so he was out. Her daughter, Alexa, was a year ahead of me in school. We'd played together until we got old enough to develop separate interests. Even though we weren't close, it was hard to picture Alexa killing her mother. "Did Lottie have life insurance?" I asked, trying to think of a motive. Mom shrugged. "I don't know. She hated thinking about death and dying. But if there is a policy, it would be here somewhere. Lottie didn't trust lawyers or banks." "Does Alexa inherit the RV?" "It's underwater. Lottie was struggling to make the payments. At one point, she thought the bank might repossess it." Mom looked so sad I couldn't bring myself to point out that money woes had, in the past, driven people to take their own lives. Not until I'd confirmed the state of Lottie's finances with my own eyes and ruled out other possibilities. "Where does Alexa live? We should tell her what happened, face to face." "It's not far. I'll go. It's been so long since you and Alexa saw each other. She might prefer we chat alone for this. She's very private." While I understood Mom's point, staying here alone felt weird. Maybe I could talk to the neighbors, but this time of year, not many people camped. There were only 2 other vehicles in the park, and no one had answered when Detective Cooper knocked on the doors earlier. Clint said they belonged to festival workers who'd gone to the fairground. "Where is Lottie's office?" I asked. "It's near the entrance to the fairground, but it's a shared space. Before you go, can you head over to the stage?
Sure, why? Karen can let you into the office, but also talk to people. See if you can figure out who saw Lottie last. Ask everyone if they saw anything that might have upset her or know about anyone with a grudge. This close to the festival, she'd be spending every waking second over there. Whatever evidence there is of motive, that's where we'll find it. After walking Mom to her car, I headed to the fairground. The goodbye hug she gave me was the longest in recent memory. Letting her go alone gave my stomach pangs, but I needed to respect that she wanted time to herself. About 100 yards down the path, I spotted a red-haired, pale white woman on a short ladder being strangled by what appeared to be a giant, furry, silver snake. It took a moment to realize she held a massive Christmas garland. Boxes of ornaments and lights littered the surrounding area, which was covered with massive drop cloths. "What's going on?" I asked. "Do you need help?" The woman sighed heavily. "I'm decorating the tree. I hired designers, but they're late, so I decided to get started. This is way outside my wheelhouse. If you know anything about draping lights or hanging ornaments, I'd be ecstatic to have you. I'm June Jenkins, by the way." "Allie," I said. "My mom's a friend of Lottie's. We were just at her place." Her expression softened. "So, you know what happened?" My eyes filled with tears. I still couldn't believe it. Taking a deep breath, I nodded. "I'm so sorry for your loss," June said. "It's a huge shock. Lottie's run this event for years. You must think I'm insensitive working at a time like this, but the festival opens tomorrow, and we can't afford to lose time." Her revelation surprised me. "Aren't they going to cancel?" "Oh, no way," she said, without a trace of emotion. "It's much too big. The Holly Jolly Jamboree is a fixture of the community. People come from all over. The organizers would never let someone's death ruin such a huge moneymaker. Not even when it's the woman in charge and the loveliest person in the world." At that, her facade crumbled, and a sob escaped her. On the one hand, it seemed callous for preparations to go on the same day her boss had been killed. On the other, the festival made a lot of money for the community, spread joy, and donated to various local charities. The event should continue, if possible. Canceling wouldn't bring Lottie back. It just meant her hard work would have been for nothing. After June composed herself, I asked, "Did Lottie seem depressed the last few days?" "Depressed? Goodness, no. The first day of the Jamboree is the highlight of her year. She's been running around like a child expecting Santa Claus." "Why?" "No reason." Either June hadn't heard the suicide rumor, or she wasn't up for sharing with a stranger. "I'm sorry. I've got to get back to work." Turning around, June yanked again on the garland. Her foot slid off the rung of the ladder. She screamed. Leaping forward, I steadied her. "Oh my," June said when she could speak again. "Thank you. I guess I should have let you help." "Put me to work. We were coming to rehearse the song, but without Mom and Lottie, that's not happening." I preferred to keep busy. There would be plenty of time for grief later. "Ah, yes. We decided to go through the play this afternoon instead. On top of everything else, I'm a maid this year. I got drafted to fill in for someone who canceled last minute." June handed me the end of the garland before disappearing into the box again. After a couple of more tugs, she yanked the end free. "Let's get started. It'll be good enough. I just want to get through this." We each took one end of the silver streamer and walked around the base of the tree, draping over the low branches and working our way up. "How long have you and Lottie worked together?" "Oh, ages," she said, eyes on the tree. "We met in our 20s, working at the same event planning company.
When they started this festival, we were thrilled. I applied for a full-time position right away. Lottie got the job, and she hired me. Sorry to hear that, I said, automatically hating myself for wondering how badly she'd wanted to be the director. I'm thrilled to help in any capacity. Her statement sounded wooden, practiced. It made me suspect June and Lottie hadn't been as close as she wanted me to think. It must be great to work with someone that you got along with so well. The brilliant smile June shot me in return would have been at home on the face of a pageant winner. Practiced, perfect, but not genuine. It didn't reach her eyes. Everyone loved Lottie. She was a joy to work with. A joy to work with. Never happier than when she was working on the festival. Then why would she take her own life days before it started? The high-pitched whine of a golf cart behind me interrupted our conversation. June's shoulders sagged with visible relief when she saw the newcomers. Oh, thank goodness! The cavalry has arrived. Cavalry? Spinning around, I found a golf cart being driven by a beaming gray-haired man in a Santa hat. Beside him, a dark-haired white woman who looked to be about 60 waved. The seat behind them was loaded with wrapped packages. Professional tree designers. They'll take over. Thanks for your help. When the golf cart came to a halt, June greeted the new arrivals and took them around the tree to show what we'd done so far. The man shook his head emphatically. The woman immediately started removing the garland we'd so painstakingly draped around the branches. I didn't blame her. Decorating wasn't my forte either. No one paid attention to me. When I asked if I could help, the decorators informed me they had staff bringing additional ornaments. My assistance was both unnecessary and unwelcome. June thanked them and took the golf cart, claiming she needed to check the Santa's Village setup on the western side of the fairground. If I wanted to continue our conversation, I'd have to run to catch up with her. Instead, I went toward the stage, where rehearsal should have been held earlier. As I followed the winding path through the woods, June's expression when the decorators pulled up flashed through my mind. Was she really excited to not have to decorate the tree herself? Or relieved not to have to answer more questions about Lottie's death and what it meant for her career? Chapter 5. After June drove away, I followed the signs to the stage. As a kid, I'd watched the shows in a large outdoor amphitheater. Things really do get smaller when you've been away. The grassy area stretched out over a fair amount of land, but the stage was tiny. Only a small platform lifting it up differentiated the area from the ground. Still, Christmas lights outlined the stage and twined around posts that designated the seating area. It would be cozy by the time the jamboree started. Several women sat on the stage, their heads bent together. I approached slowly. When no one looked up, I coughed several times. Finally, a woman about my mom's age looked up at me with red-rimmed blue eyes. Her expression softened when she saw me. You must be Connie's daughter. I'm Karen. Your mom and I were texting earlier. Allie, I said. Mom and I both wanted to give you our condolences. A sea of arms engulfed me. Words filled the air, coming from 4 different women at once. Finally, Karen cleared her throat to quiet the others. Where is your mom? Is she okay? She went to see Alexa, I said. She asked me to talk to you. About Lottie? Another member of the group spoke. She was short, with asymmetrical black hair and heavy liner rimming her dark eyes. I'm Anne. Your mom called me on the way to Alexa's. I already told everyone those idiot cops think Lottie killed herself. Her choice of words made me smile. You don't believe it either? Come on now, we don't know anything yet, a willowy woman with long blonde curls and rosy cheeks said.
In her black ski jacket and matching hat, she looked like a model for outdoor sports, except for the impractical navy ballet flats. You never know what's inside a person's head. This happens all the time where everyone is surprised because a person seemed happy, but depression makes people do strange things. I'm Tony, by the way. Why would anyone kill themselves in the middle of a work day? Lottie was here this morning, and we're supposed to believe she walked home and shot herself between meetings? Karen asked. A tall woman with her black hair pulled back into a high ponytail shuddered. The thought of my job being the last place I ever see is enough to make me determined to live. That's because your job is awful, Anne replied. Tony snorted, then clapped a hand over her mouth as if to hold it in. Anne, come on, we're all thinking it, she replied. Gretchen is always talking about how much she hates work. The woman who must be Gretchen flushed and looked at the toes of her brown loafers. It could be worse. You both have a point, though, Tony said. Lottie came to work this morning as if everything was normal. What could have changed in a couple of hours? Running a festival is stressful, Anne pointed out. Maybe she hit her breaking point. Or maybe someone wanted it to look like suicide, Karen said, echoing my thoughts. That's the point you're trying to make, right? Gretchen gasped. Murder at the Holly Jolly Jamboree. Oh, no way. I've been coming here since I was a kid. Connie and I have been attending since the year it opened, Anne said. June and Lottie worked here the whole time. That doesn't mean someone couldn't have killed her. My head spun. They were talking so fast I could barely keep up. I hoped their play would be easier to follow than this conversation. As the maids continued arguing over something Mom and I had already decided, I put up my hands. Hold on, everyone. When they quieted and looked at me, I continued. Lottie was at work this morning. Who all saw her? I did, Karen said. I'm in charge of advance ticket sales and the website, so I arrived around 8. Lottie brought me coffee, then settled in at her desk. She had meetings all morning. Her desk? I'd almost forgotten Mom and I wanted to search Lottie's office. You're sure she was going to meetings? Did you see her calendar? She shrugged. I didn't study it, but her weekly schedule was open on the computer. There were dozens of entries. Why? If we can figure out who Lottie met this morning, we might be able to determine when she went home. Or we can find the last person who saw her alive, I said. Karen, it might have been you, Anne said. No way. The train cars were delivered around 9. Lottie left the office to talk to the delivery people. Then she went to check on the reindeer. When she didn't come back, I figured she'd found something else needing her attention. There's no shortage of work right now. Any chance she left her phone at her desk? I asked. It wasn't in her RV, and it could tell us something. She shook her head. I didn't notice. Sorry. This wasn't going well. I switched tactics. Do any of you know if Lottie had enemies? Other than June, you mean? Gretchen asked. I wrinkled my brow. Her assistant? Anne barked out a laugh. June is way more than that. She's Lottie's second in command. Now that Lottie's gone, she's in charge of the entire festival. The chair makes a lot more money, and she'll get a big bonus if the event hits its sales goals. This close to the start, June is the only person who could take over. Money made an excellent motive for murder, and June had definitely been lying about how much she enjoyed working for Lottie. Maybe we were onto something. Tony said, That's not all. June's been working her tail off on marketing and bringing in advanced sales, but Lottie swept in last week and took all the credit. June was breathing fire for 2 days. It seemed odd for these women to be telling me, a total stranger, so much. I thought you all were friends. Tony smiled at me sympathetically. Friends still notice what's going on around them. June is part of our group too. What Lottie did wasn't right. Some of us are on her side, Gretchen said, with a pointed look at Anne. I mean, as long as she didn't. June doesn't have a violent bone in her body. Would June kill to get the recognition she deserved for the festival? Would her friends help cover it up? Anyone else? A new boyfriend, an ex, anything like that? I asked. A loud silence descended on the group. Suddenly, all four maids seemed to be looking at anything but each other. If anyone knows anything that could help prove Lottie didn't kill herself, now is the time, I said. Anne nudged Karen. Fine, she snapped. I don't like to gossip, but the past few months Lottie's been sneaking around with Clint, the head of Santa's village. This explains why he went into the RV without knocking. When Clint found me and Mom earlier, I'd wondered if he'd been faking his surprise at finding Lottie dead. He was hiding something. Maybe he just didn't want us to guess their relationship? Still, it would be short-sighted not to dig a little deeper into Lottie's lover. Were they having problems? I asked. On the verge of a bad breakup or something like that? Anne said, maybe Lottie wanted Clint to leave his wife. She did not, Karen stepped forward. This is all speculation. I don't want to believe that Lottie killed herself, but come on. Those rumors will destroy the entire festival. We need evidence. Shouting in the distance made us turn toward the far end of the meadow. My pulse quickened. Maybe the police had arrived to arrest the killer. It would be great to know. Two identical women with short gray hair and dancing brown eyes burst into view. They wore matching green and red striped caps, similar to what an elf would wear, matching red sweaters and black yoga pants. Even their red sneakers were identical. The only discernible difference was that one of them had an angry scratch on the back of her right hand. We're here, Scratchy gasped out. Don't start without us. We would never, Tony said. What happened to your hand? She turned red. It's nothing, her twin said. She won't even tell me. Are you in the show? I asked. I thought rehearsal was supposed to start hours ago. They were here, Karen said. They left after we got the news. Allie, these are the last two members of our group, Betty and Babs. We're twins, they said unnecessarily. Usually when I met twins, my analytical brain immediately went to fraternal or identical and started looking for differences. That wasn't necessary. Betty and Babs moved as a single cell. Nice to meet you, Babs, I said to the one with the scratch. I'm Betty, she replied. Oh, sorry. The other twin laughed. She's kidding. I'm Betty. I turned to Karen. Can you tell them apart? She shrugged. Sometimes I'm not sure they can tell themselves apart. Betty, or was it Babs, giggled, a high, tinkling sound. The other let out a belly laugh. They looked at each other and clapped their hands over their mouths. I'm so sorry, Babs whispered. We forgot for a minute, Betty added. It's okay, I said. Lottie wouldn't want us to stop enjoying life. We're glad you're here, Anne added. We want to know what happened. Connie said you found her. Is it true that she killed herself? Babs asked me. It seemed so unlike her. That's what we said, Karen said. The police think this was a suicide, I said. There's no way, though. Mom and I are positive. We'll figure it out, Karen announced, standing up straight and throwing her head back. Let's team up. Anne, go with Tony. Talk to the elves. Interview Maureen. Who's Maureen? I asked. Clint's wife, Anne said. Is that wise? If she found out about the affair, she could be our #1 suspect. I don't want you two in danger." "She's my sister," Tony said. My face flamed. "Sorry," Karen continued as if I hadn't said anything. "Betty and Babs, talk to the police and see what you can find out." "We're on it," they chorused. "I already tried," I began. Betty winked at me. "We have a unique way of getting information." Her tone told me not to ask questions. My witch friend once got someone to confess to murder by sewing their clothes into a couch. Sometimes it was better not to know. Karen continued. "Allie, tell everyone you're helping with the show. That way you've got a reason for being here. Snoop around, ask questions. Most people are happy to talk about their jobs, and you might find hidden grievances if no one knows how close your family was to Lottie." Good idea. A thought occurred to me. Karen had taken charge awfully quickly, and part of me wondered why. "What will you be doing?" She straightened her shoulders. "Me? I'm going to investigate June, of course. Gretchen, you come with me. Ladies, synchronize your watches. We'll meet back here in an hour." In all my time assisting the Shady Grove police with murder investigations, never had anyone taken charge and delegated like this. It was kind of nice to let someone else tell me what to do. Still, as the group scattered to get started on our respective tasks, a little voice in the back of my head asked who was investigating Karen. Chapter 6. Once the maids scattered, I texted Mom for an ETA. A moment later, my phone rang. I answered without looking at the display. "Hi, Mom." "I know you hate speaking out loud like a civilized person, but I'm driving, so you'll have to deal with it. Besides, you're mostly going to listen." "How's Alexa?" Devastated, of course. The police had already visited, so I didn't have to break the news. The detectives said they pulled security footage for the past 24 hours. "That's great. What does it show?" "Nothing." My heart sank. "Nothing like there aren't tapes?" "The tapes don't contain useful information, although they're supposed to run 24/7. Either there's a glitch or someone hacked the footage." "What do you mean?" "According to Detective Cooper, last night, the cameras picked up Lottie walking in from the parking lot around 9 o'clock and moving toward her motorhome. Alexa said they finished dinner at 8:45, so that checks out. But that's the last time Lottie appeared. Based on the footage, Lottie never left the trailer park again." I frowned. "That doesn't make sense. Lottie was at work this morning." "That's why I think someone hacked the system. We know she left, and someone must have gone in." "Are they looking for a hacker with a grudge?" "Detective Cooper says the cameras must have malfunctioned. She refuses to believe it was murder." Mom let out a sob. "Whoever killed Lottie is going to get away with it." "No, they won't," I said firmly. "Karen will tell the police she spoke with Lottie on site this morning. Others can confirm it. All your friends from the show are investigating. We're going to find so much evidence, Detective Cooper will have no choice but to listen to us." When she spoke again, I heard the smile in Mom's voice. "That's my girl." I'd love to take credit, but Karen is spearheading this effort. Aware that I stood in a public place, I lowered my voice. "What do you know about the other maids? Could one of them have had a problem with Lottie? There are some whispers that June didn't love working for her." "No one loves their boss," Mom said. Although I personally disagreed, I let her continue. "Their working relationship could be strained at times, but that's normal. June is a pacifist. She doesn't even believe in killing in self-defense." "What about the twins?" I asked. "They're unusual." Mom laughed. "If Betty and Babs murdered someone, we would never know it. They're smarter than the rest of us combined, and they taught me everything about being psychic when I was your age."
They have powers? What can they do? Most people's abilities manifested differently. Mom and I had similar but not identical powers tied to impressions left on objects. My boss could touch an item and know who it belonged to. My brother could see lies. Too bad Kevin went to Florida for the holidays. Oh, what would be the fun in me telling you that? Spend more time with them, you'll see. They're on our side. She seemed so certain I didn't want to argue. The scratch on Bab's hand was my only reason for being suspicious. She'd acted strange when asked about it, but that didn't necessarily mean anything. What about the others? I met Karen a few months ago, but I trust everyone in the cast. So did Lottie. Who else saw her this morning? I'll ask around. We need her phone. As I spoke, I realized that with Karen questioning people, Lottie's office should be empty. Her phone could be there, or she might have a calendar on her computer. Let me call you back. I'm going to search Lottie's desk. Be careful, Mom said. I'll text you when I get there, since you won't answer the phone more than once a month. For my favorite mother, I can answer the phone twice. After we hung up, I returned to the fairground entrance. Although I'd left barely an hour ago, the display had been transformed. The decorators moved at light speed. Lights and garlands twined up the massive tree, and they'd hung glittering ornaments on the first few feet near the top. Tomorrow, with everything lit up, it would be breathtaking. I bypassed the tree, heading toward a small wooden building off to the side of the entrance. It was tucked back far enough that the average festival-goer would have no reason to be there. Most who ventured over here would stop at the restrooms or water bottle filler before heading back to the clearing. In case I was wrong about the office being empty, I knocked. When no one replied, I recited 20 elements of the periodic table before reaching for the knob. Locked. Unlike Lottie's RV, this building didn't have a handy keypad for me to pull images from. Just a regular, normal doorknob that required a key. While Mom said she was proud of my methods for getting into Lottie's RV, she'd disown me for this one. After a glance to ensure no one could see, I slid a set of lockpicks out of my bag. My best friend Rusty worked as a PI, and he'd taught me how to use them. At first, I'd kept them because you never knew when my 5-year-old nephew might lock himself in somewhere, intentionally or not, but they'd come in handy more than once. Now, they lived in my backpack. Crouching down, I studied the lock before making my first choice. A long, thin pick slid easily into the keyhole. After fiddling with it for a moment, I chose a second one. This one I pressed down, listening carefully. I adjusted the pick slightly before grabbing a third. A few seconds later, the lock clicked open. Once inside, I closed and locked the door behind me. If Karen came back, I had nowhere to hide, but anyone else should leave when they found the door locked. For now, I hoped Karen wouldn't catch me here before I figured out if she was innocent. 2 workstations on either side of the room faced each other. I identified Lottie's immediately by the screensaver, a recent picture of her and Mom that made my heart lurch. Since she hadn't shut it down, Lottie must have intended to return. Sitting at the desk, I closed my eyes and placed my hands on the keyboard, trying to get a sense of Lottie's emotions before she left. Was she angry? Sad? Suicidal? Nothing jumped out at me. Most likely she felt like she was at work. Busy, stressed, excited for the festival. I jiggled the mouse to get the password screen and pictured Lottie. My fingers pressed random buttons, and a moment later, a vision gave me Lottie's password. I swear I only used my powers for good. Really, this was my most useful skill. First, I pulled up the calendar. As expected, meetings and events packed every day this week. She met with everyone. June, Clint, someone who wanted her to approve a change to cupcakes, and at least a half a dozen contractors. She'd planned a busy workday. If she'd been intending to end her life, why not schedule PTO or call in sick? At least she could have delegated some of her tasks. Even though I loved my job, Gretchen was right.
No one wanted work to be the last thing they ever did. This didn't make sense. After snapping pictures of the day's schedule, I scrolled ahead, noting many appointments on her list for the next 3 days. I snapped photos of those too. While a to-do list might not convince the police of much, every detail counted. We intended to compile so much evidence they couldn't ignore us. Next, I checked Lottie's inbox. She had more than 24 unread emails, some from yesterday and several that came in after she passed away. Her inbox also contained over 3,000 read messages. Since scrolling through everything would take weeks, I skimmed the most recent messages. Almost all were related to the festival, making plans, expressing excitement for the upcoming event, or both. One offered her a job running a festival in Memphis more than a year away. According to Lottie's reply, she'd been excited by the opportunity and would make a decision within the next week. It read like she intended to live beyond the jamboree. With a sigh, I clicked over to the deleted messages. Maybe these would be more helpful. All 14,000 of them. Wonderful. A message at the top jumped out at me. A 3-word subject. Come see me. The message had been sent at 9:30 this morning by Clint. Less than 45 minutes later, he'd been in Lottie's motorhome. When I clicked on the message, the body was blank. That was it. Come see me. He must have assumed she'd know where to find him. Just in case, I printed the message, but also snapped a picture of it. Then I scrolled down to Lottie's reply. I have nothing to say to you. Over and over, I read those 7 words. What did Clint want to talk about? Why didn't Lottie want to talk to him? He ran a major part of the festival, and she was in charge of ensuring the whole thing ran smoothly. They should have had dozens of things to talk about. According to her friends, they'd been seeing each other. What went wrong? Chapter 7. My mind whirled. This email didn't seem work-related. The Merry Maid said Clint and Lottie were having an affair. He'd been comfortable walking into her motorhome, the home of his boss, without an invitation in the middle of a workday when most people wouldn't expect her to be home. How did he know she was there? Did he follow her after she refused to meet him? Clint had to know more than he told the police. After snapping a picture of his message and Lottie's reply, I rummaged through the desk looking for Lottie's purse or a cell phone. The bag was tucked in the back of the bottom right drawer, another sign that she'd planned to come back. The phone wasn't in it, though. Where could it be? Racking my brain, I reset the screensaver, wiped my fingerprints off the keys, and pushed the chair back into place. Then I carefully wiped off the doorknob on both sides, locked the door behind me, and went to find Clint. Since the train loop included Santa's Village, I followed the tracks away from the entrance, deeper into the woods. After a few minutes, a horn honked behind me. I jumped. Ding, 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 a voice called. Make way for the Santa Express. Turning, I found a brightly painted train coming toward me, moving roughly 1 mile per hour. It was small, the type used as a children's amusement park ride rather than a transportation vehicle. I hadn't thought about it earlier, but considering we were operating on a fairground, that made more sense than having a full-sized passenger train drop by. In the first car, a guy about my age wore an elf hat with jingling bells. He pulled to a halt and grinned at me. All aboard? Is this the Polar Express? I asked. Oh, no, that's trademarked, very expensive, he said. Can I offer you a lift? I'd hate to see a lady get lost in the snow. Confused, I glanced down at the bare ground and my flip-flop-clad feet, then up to the sky. Snow? Use your imagination. I'm trying to stay in character. Xander, by the way. Allie, it's nice to meet you. I was heading over to Santa's Village. Are you sure you don't mind giving me a ride? Always happy to help a damsel in distress. He doffed his cap at me before hopping out to help me into the second car. The inside resembled any amusement park ride.
After I buckled my seatbelt and he locked the metal bar in place, he returned to the front. Once we took off, he called back over his shoulder, "What brings you here? We weren't expecting visitors until tomorrow." My mouth opened to tell him the truth, that I'd come to see Lottie, but Karen's words came back to me. People would tell me more if they weren't aware of our relationship. I opted for a partial truth. My mom is performing in the Jamboree skit. She asked me to watch practice, but it got delayed. He shook his head. "Such a shame. You heard, right, about our director? Sorry, I'm so inconsiderate. My mom is always saying, 'Xander, you need to think before you speak. You can't go around blurting out that someone killed themselves.' Oh man, there I go again. I'm so sorry. You knew she died, right? That's why your practice got canceled." Interesting that the suicide rumor made the rounds so quickly, considering no one I'd talked to believed it. Cause of death didn't seem like something the police would release right away, and Mom and I certainly hadn't said anything. Was Clint reinforcing the lie? "Oh, my goodness, what happened?" I asked, curious to see what else he would say. He shook his head. "So sad. Our executive director came to work today, left after a couple of hours, and killed herself. I can't believe it. I never knew anyone who died before, you know?" We were old enough that his comment surprised me. Then again, before moving to Shady Grove, I didn't know anyone who died either. Now I seemed to find dead people everywhere. I was starting to think I'd been cursed. It had happened before, but that witch and I patched things up last Christmas. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said. "Did you know Lottie well?" "Not really. She came around sometimes to check on our progress. She was in charge, and we all answered to her. Whatever Lottie wanted, we did. But we weren't friends. She's my boss, older than my mom. I can't believe she's dead. I saw her this morning, you know what I mean? Not 4 hours ago, she was arguing with Clint." "You heard her arguing with Clint?" I tried to hide the eagerness in my voice. Luckily, he didn't seem to notice. "About what?" "Everyone in Santa's village heard them. Lottie wasn't quiet. That's why it was so weird. Normally, she and Clint are buddy-buddy, all smiles. She's the boss, but she usually listens to his input. Not today. It was so awkward. A bunch of us left to get coffee. When we came back, Lottie and Clint were gone, but everything looked the way she'd wanted it. We figured she'd won the argument." As if realizing what he was about to say, Xander sat up abruptly and peered intently at the tracks before us. Following his lead, I scanned the scenery and wondered how to prod him into saying more. The ground looked beaten down, as if people walked through there regularly. Flashes of color peeked out in the distance. But even though we were moving slowly, the trees were too dense for me to get a good view. "What's over there?" I pointed. "I thought the train ran along the outside of the fairground." "It does," he said. "That's the trailer park." Wait, was the trailer park connected directly to the fairground? Trying to conceal the excitement in my voice, I asked, "Is there a path? Could someone walk from the fairground to their motorhome without going out the front entrance and through the parking lot?" "Sure, happens all the time. If you're staying next door, this is the fastest way to get back. They can't do it during the event, but now there's no reason to walk all the way around." His words opened up a whole world of possibilities. If Lottie took a shortcut from her RV to the fairground, the security footage wouldn't show her leaving the campsite this morning or going home before she died. That explained why only Mom and I appeared on the recordings. Whoever killed Lottie must have snuck through the woods, then disappeared back into the bustle of the fairground. There wasn't a problem with the cameras at all. "Are there other paths to the trailer park? Or other cameras?" I added silently. He shrugged. "It's the woods. If you're willing to hike, you can go anywhere." "Stop the train?" He half turned to look at me. "What?" "I need to get out, right now." "Look,
I don't mind showing you around. You're cute, and talking to you is keeping my mind off things. But I can't abandon the train, and you can't wander off. June would fire me on the spot if I let a civilian get lost on the day our director died. You'll freeze out there.
Freeze. I live in New York. At his confused look, I added, It's been below freezing for the past 2 weeks. Where I live, a December day in the 50s is cause for celebration. He shook his head.
Sorry, we're going back to the station.
Where's the nearest station? He gestured.
About a quarter mile up ahead. The next stop is the stage.
The train ran on a track, so it would be easy to follow on my own. I could wait until we stopped at the stage, then double back. Could, but wasn't going to. The sun was shining, there was little wind, and the air felt as warm as your average October day in Shady Grove. This might feel cold to people in California, but I'd adjusted to New York weather. Even in flip-flops, I'd be fine. Not to mention that the whole fairground was outside. How cold could it be under the trees? Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I unbuckled my seatbelt. Then I asked Xander to tell me about the stage to distract him while I fiddled with the safety bar. After a few seconds, I found the clasp and popped it open. The bar creaked upward with a traitorous screech.
What was that?
Xander asked. Oh, nothing, I said, standing. Thanks for the lift. Before I lost my nerve, I leapt out of the car. Although the train traveled with the speed of a frigid atom cloud, the landing left me off balance. Graceful, I was not. I fell to my knees, gasping for breath. The train screeched to a halt. Xander gaped at me from the driver's seat.
What are you doing? Come back.
I'm going to look at the trail. Go on without me. He heaved a heavy sigh and turned the train off. After a moment, he lifted his own safety bar.
Let's make this quick.
Are you coming with me?
Apparently so, he said. But if I get fired, it's your fault.
Chapter 8. Keeping my eyes peeled, I headed down the path. Xander followed, jingling with each step. After the third step, I stopped and turned, wondering how a few bells could make so much noise. That's a very musical hat you've got. Sheepishly, he lifted one foot, revealing forest green elf shoes with bells on the toes.
It's a whole thing. Sorry.
Luckily, I was more interested in finding clues than being quiet. I couldn't ask a stranger to walk barefoot through the forest because he walked too loudly. The path wasn't much, barely an opening between the trees. Once the festival started, people would walk by without a glance, especially at night. But now it was like one of those pictures that's fuzzy until your eyes relax enough. Once spotted, I couldn't unsee it. About 200 feet into the woods, a fluttering caught my eye. It was a long shot, but what if the killer's shirt got caught on a branch when they made their getaway? I needed to get closer.
What are you doing?
Xander asked as I crept toward the bush, my eyes never wavering from the branch holding my prize. This bush is amazing, I said, thinking quickly. I've never seen anything like it. Do you happen to know its scientific name?
It's what?
You know, every living thing has a family, order, phylum, down to genus and species. Like Homo sapiens. I didn't care about the answer, but I needed to keep Xander talking so he didn't wonder what I was doing.
Oh, right.
He cleared his throat.
Yeah, that's, Homo bushius.
With great effort, I concealed a snort of laughter. Luckily, I was focusing on the bush instead of looking at him. Thanks. By the time I got my amusement under control, I'd made it to the bush. The item that caught my eye was still moving in the breeze. I heaved a sigh when I recognized it. Garbage. Nothing more interesting than a piece of paper caught on a bush. Tears of disappointment sprang to my eyes, and I hastily blinked them away. Xander couldn't see me getting emotional. No one but the maids knew about my connection to Lottie. I turned away from the bush, but something told me to take a second look. Like maybe this scrap meant something. It still fluttered,
as if it wanted me to pick it up. When I started to reach in, Xander grabbed my arm. "You don't need to pick up trash out here." "Give me a second," I said, shaking him off. If the scrap turned out to be a candy bar wrapper, I'd feel ridiculous. But over the past 2 years, I'd learned to trust my gut. Crouching, I peered into the bushes. Maybe I should pull out my phone for additional light. Before I could reach for it, Xander stepped up behind me and pointed his beam. Nice of him to help, even though he definitely thought I wasn't the brightest star in the sky. What we'd both taken for trash turned out to be part of a thick piece of paper. From this angle, it was impossible to see if anything was written on it. I wished I'd had tweezers to pull it out without getting my fingerprints on it. It hadn't occurred to me to bring gloves this morning. Also, as usual, I didn't know where they were. Somewhere in New York? Pushing the branches aside, I reached for the paper. "Hold on," Xander said. "Let me do it." Surprised, I glanced at him. Then he held his hand up, revealing thick red gloves with white trim. "They're part of the conductor outfit. The controls get cold." "Thanks." With a smile, I moved backward, still holding the shrub open to give him access. Xander reached into the opening. Squinting into the darkness, he tugged, pushing his tongue between his teeth. After a moment, he worked the scrap free and looked at it. With a shrug, he held it out to me. "Hope this is what you were looking for?" So much for not wanting my fingerprints on it. It would look weird if I refused to take it now, or if I covered my hand with my t-shirt. I took the paper before Xander changed his mind about giving it to me. Someone had torn this bit off a larger page. Judging from the ragged edges, the original had gotten ripped into multiple pieces. The paper was thick, off-white, and familiar. One side was blank. Flipping it over, I saw loopy blue ink, spelling Priet Foe. Well, that was incredibly helpful. What a wealth of information at my fingertips. A growl of frustration escaped me. "Are you okay?" Xander asked. "Why did you need garbage?" I sighed. "Yeah, I'm fine. This is nothing. I just, hate littering. Try to make a point of cleaning up nature when I can." "Yeah, me too. There's a trash can ahead. I'll show you." As if I'd give up my booty without digging deeper. I bent down to adjust my flip-flop, letting Xander move ahead. The second the trail turned and put a tree between us, I laid the scrap on my left hand and moved my right as if holding a pen. My world shifted. I sat at a Formica table, looking at a pile of off-white stationery on the shiny surface. The top page said, "From the desk of Charlotte Wilder," in gold letters. To the right of the letters was a large wildflower. The bottom said, "Eco paper, read then plant." My fingers gripped the blue pen. "Dear Clint, I'm so sorry, but the time has come for us to part ways. I've been thinking for a while, and it's not working out. I feel terrible about sneaking around. It isn't appropriate for me to be dating an employee. I have thought long and hard about this decision. As much as I love you, this is the best thing for both of us." A tear hit the page, and a ring-laden hand blotted it away. Snapping fingers jolted me back to the present. Xander stood there, his face a mixture of confusion and fear. "Hello? What's going on? Are there drugs on that paper?" Ignoring him, I blinked rapidly, trying to hold onto the vision he'd shaken me out of. It was too late, though. I shouldn't have tried until I was alone, but I'd been afraid he'd get weird if I refused to throw an inch of ripped paper in the trash. "Allie? What are you doing? This is not cool. I'm going back to work." Since I didn't need Xander in the first place, I remained more concerned with what happened in my vision than him ditching me. At least now I had a reason for keeping the scrap. The paper in my hand didn't have nearly as many words as the ones in my vision, but it was clearly from the same note. The paper was the same, the ink was the same, the loopy handwriting matched. Not only the page from my vision, but the note we'd found on the nightstand earlier. Mentally, I put the words from each note together. I have thought long and hard about this decision. As much as I love you, this is the best thing for both of us. I'm so sorry. I can't go on like this. It's too hard. Please know I'll always love you. Love, Lottie. 2 pages. 1 sentiment. A breakup letter with the greeting on page 1 and the signature on page 2 could easily double as a suicide note. This scrap came from the now destroyed first page of the letter. Lottie hadn't been talking about ending her life. Her killer must have planted the note where the police would find it. The fact that Lottie had broken up with Clint shortly before her death seemed quite suspicious. What if she'd given him the letter and he'd killed her in a fit of rage? "You've got 3 seconds, Xander said, firmly enough that I finally looked at him. "I'm fine," I said, my brain still processing what I'd seen. "This stationery belonged to Lottie. It's a big shock. We need to go back so I can give this to the detective." "A torn piece of paper? Why would they care? And how do you know what her stationery looks like? None of this makes sense." He put his hands on his hips. "There's something you're not telling me. Are you one of those people who take souvenirs from crime scenes?" "What? There are people like that?" "There are, and I'm looking at one." "I promise that's not it. But you never know what could be important, and this scrap feels meaningful," I said, not wanting to go into detail. "Lottie killed herself," he said. "That's what they told me. Why did the police need you to do anything?" This was dangerous territory. If too many people heard that I'd taken it upon myself to investigate, they might come after me. Or worse, Mom. On the other hand, he'd take the paper and destroy it if I didn't say something to convince him I wasn't some kind of morbid trophy collector. "My mom is having a hard time accepting Lottie's death," I said. "I was hoping to find something to help her make sense of it. This scrap might mean nothing. It's probably trash, but I have to try. It's okay if you don't understand." Xander stared at me for a long moment. Then he shrugged. "I always heard people process grief in weird ways. Come on, let's go." When he returned to the trail, I stuffed the paper into my pocket. We followed the path to the campground, but didn't find any other scraps. The only thing in the garbage can was some broken glass. Probably a beer bottle or something. Too bad. If we'd gotten enough bits of the letter to piece together the entire message, that would help me convince the police to investigate. I wished we'd seen what happened after Lottie wrote the letter. Who came in? When? That wasn't happening. So Xander led me back to the train. We mostly sat in silence while I considered what I'd seen. The way he looked at me made me wonder, not for the first time, what third parties saw when I got a vision. About 10 minutes later, the train came into view. My knees shook as I climbed aboard. Leaning back in the seat and closing my eyes, I gripped the metal bar gratefully. Although our hike hadn't been physically difficult, emotionally, I'd run out of gas. "Are you okay?" Xander asked. Not trusting myself to speak, I nodded. A moment later, the whistle blew and the train trundled forward. "Do you want to see the whole loop?" Xander had been so helpful. It made sense to stick with him. "Yes, please." He grinned at me. "Next stop, Santa's Village." A few minutes later, Xander stopped at the station we'd been headed for prior to my unscheduled detour. It was essentially a ticket booth, but one brightly painted with a train on the outside. Dancing elves brought the building to life, and striped candy canes framed the window. "Here we are. Welcome to Santa's Village. Last stop. Everybody out." After exiting the train, I thanked Xander for the ride, then asked him to show me around the rest of the village. He took me to the stable where several reindeer had been delivered only a few hours earlier. The place bustled with activity, so we didn't go inside. Attached to the building was a fenced-in area where Xander said Rudolph would pull the kids in Santa's sleigh. I couldn't wait to see it. Then we went to the candy store, A large throne where Saint Nick would listen to the kids tell him what they wanted for Christmas, and Santa's workshop. The final building took my breath away. From the stacks of wrapped toys to the painted scenes of elves working to bring toys to life. Those aren't prop boxes. Every kid gets a toy, Xander told me proudly. I give you one now, but... Oh, no, I assured him. That's not necessary. What if you run out? The entire time, my mind raced, trying to figure out how to bring the conversation back around to Lottie and Clint, or how to find more clues without Xander noticing. It had been hard enough to explain my attachment to a tiny scrap of paper, and he didn't believe me. Finally, I dove in. What was working for Lottie like? He shrugged, reading his phone. She seemed happy, you know. Listen, sorry, I gotta go. Clint needs me. If you're still around when I'm done, I'll take you up front. Maybe we could get a drink. Suddenly, I realized why Xander had been so friendly all afternoon. As distracted as I'd been since Mom and I found Lottie, it never occurred to me that he might perceive my conversation as romantic interest. I pasted my most apologetic smile on my face. Sorry, I'm seeing someone. His face turned red. His phone buzzed again, and he glanced at it before shoving it into his pocket. Hey, no problem. See you around. I was about to apologize again for making Xander uncomfortable, but he was back on the train, fast as a comet. No problem. I can find my own way back, I muttered. Then I realized that Xander had given me a gift. The private opportunity to poke around one of the last places Lottie visited before getting killed. He'd said she was here approximately 4 hours ago, which would have been around 9 o'clock this morning. It wasn't long after 10 when Mom and I arrived. What happened to Lottie during that hour? Did Clint follow her home? In my vision, Lottie seemed to be alone, but she wouldn't be writing a breakup note while he read over her shoulder. Something happened after the vision ended. I also didn't know when the note was written. What role did Clint's wife play in all this? Did she know about the affair? Maybe she'd confronted Lottie and the conversation went badly. Since Xander said Lottie and Clint argued at the train station, I wandered back to it. A closed, barred ticket window faced away from the train tracks. There was no way to see inside. It was more of an enclosed booth than an actual building. Most shifts probably had 1 or 2 employees managing sales. Behind me, a white fence extended several feet on either side, with a gate opening onto the train platform. The all aboard sign depicting a train and a Christmas tree pointed people to the line. People milled in and out of Santa's workshop on the left, but no one paid attention to me. Good thing, because I hadn't brought my spelled sunglasses that kept people from looking at me. Silly me, thinking I'd get through one vacation without anyone committing murder. The doorknob twisted easily in my hand. Before I could talk myself out of it, I pushed inside. The world shifted, and suddenly I was looking at the room through someone else's eyes. A counter ran along the wall under the window. An antique cash register took up the left side, next to a shiny new credit card reader. Other than that, there were 2 stools by the counter. There was nothing else, except the couple making out against the sidewall. Clint and Lottie were pressed tightly together. His hands cupped her face, one of hers twisted in his hair. A gasp escaped me, or whoever had spotted them. The couple broke apart, looking guilty. Before either of them could say a word, I fled. Chapter 9. After whoever spotted Clint and Lottie embracing raced out of the ticket booth, my world returned to normal. I stood in the doorway of a tiny, empty room smelling vaguely of paint. Other than the stool and cash register, the place was bare. I tried using both to induce another vision, but neither told me anything. Xander had said Clint and Lottie were arguing this morning. Maybe they were discussing the best way to handle getting caught. Or maybe the argument involved 3 people, Clint, Lottie, and whoever found them together. He was, after all, married. They could have caught up to the unknown intruder after my vision ended. Who was it? Had Clint's wife seen them? "What are you doing?" The voice made me jump. Clint stood outside the tiny booth, glaring. "Only official personnel are allowed in here." Ignoring his question, I went on the offensive. "You and Lottie were having an affair." "That's none of your business." I continued. "You were comfortable walking into her home without an invitation, and you sent her an email not long before she died asking to meet her." His eyes narrowed. "How could you possibly know that?" "Karen saw it," I lied. "In their office this morning, Xander told me he overheard you and Lottie arguing. Did someone catch the two of you together? Was she going to break up with you?" "I don't have to tell you anything. You heard the police. Lottie killed herself. The bosses told everyone. There is no murder. Go home." "Are you protecting your wife?" I asked. "I'm giving you 3 seconds to get out of here before I call security to escort you from the fairground." I'd made it about 10 feet when he called me back. "Hey, aluminum, wait." His use of my full name made me wince. He'd been sitting nearby when Detective Cooper asked me for ID this morning. Of course, he would remember the longer version I tried to escape. My parents loved science, and so did I, but we had very different ideas about the best way to express that sentiment. Couldn't they have named me Marie Curie Reynolds instead? I turned and crossed my arms over my chest. Maybe I should have been scared, but I had trouble believing Clint killed Lottie. He jogged over to me and lowered his voice. "I would never hurt Lottie. I loved her. If it were up to me, we'd have been together. She didn't want to be tied down. She liked the excitement of the fling, the thrill of sneaking around." His words rang true. Lottie's husband passed away more than 10 years ago, and while she'd gone on plenty of dates, she'd never been serious about anyone. She often compared marriage to being locked in a cage. "Who caught you sneaking around?" He shook his head. "It happened so fast. My back was to the door. I heard them come in, Lottie's eyes widened, and by the time I got myself together, they were gone." "Did you get a sense of height, hair color, gender?" "A woman, I think." "What did you do?" "I ran after her. Lottie stayed here to compose herself. I looked all over but couldn't figure out who would have gone to the ticket booth. Asked a couple of people. No one knew who might be looking for me. Worse, everyone is always looking for Lottie this close to the jamboree. It could have been almost any member of the staff." "Are you sure it wasn't your wife?" "Positive." He sighed and ran his hands through his hair. "She wouldn't have stormed out. Lottie knew we were caught. If someone reported her to the head honchos, she would have been fired. Heck, we both would have. As much as I don't want to believe it, I think she went home and the stress overwhelmed her." "Nope, no way. I've known Lottie my whole life. She didn't kill herself." To me, the note proved it, but I couldn't tell him that. Frustrated, I turned to follow the train tracks back to the entrance. Mom hadn't returned by the time the Merry Maids were supposed to reconvene. I wanted to tell her about the path I'd found, show her the scrap of paper, and explain my vision. It didn't tell me anything about who the killer might be, but maybe she'd think of something I hadn't. What was I missing? While I'd been suspicious of Karen taking charge of my investigation, she didn't seem to have a motive. The 3 people with the strongest reason to kill Lottie were June, Clint, and his wife. Clint still didn't strike me as a killer, but the other 2 were question marks. I hadn't even met his wife. He seemed sure his wife hadn't walked in on them, but how could he know? Or what if he was protecting her? I didn't realize I'd reached the clearing in front of the stage until one of the twins called out my name. "So sorry we're late," Babs and Betty chorused, "but you'll be happy once you hear about our trip to the police station." Given my own interactions this morning, unless one of the twins had a pre-existing relationship with an officer, I didn't expect them to have much luck. "If you learned anything, you're ahead of me," I said. The only thing the police told me was to get lost." "Oh, don't think like that," the one with the scratched hand said. I thought that was Babs. "You've gotten us to help, and that's no easy feat. I can't remember the last time the maids all agreed on anything." Betty said, "We agreed to do the show, didn't we?" "Touché." Babs opened her purse and reached inside. Then she paused, turning to her sister. "Would you like to do the honors? After all, this whole thing was your idea." "Oh, I couldn't. Not when you were so brilliant," Betty said. The two of them were giving me a headache. "Would one of you please tell me what's going on?" "Sure, Allie, sorry," Babs, maybe, said. "B, you do it." Of course, she wouldn't make my life easier by using her sister's full name and confirming my suspicions. They must enjoy the confusion. Betty made a big show of pulling on gloves. "Don't want to leave fingerprints, you know." Great. If Babs also put on gloves and they moved at all, I'd be back at square one. I took a deep breath, ready to insist they quit the theatrics and tell me what they wanted me to know. The words died in my throat when Betty reached into her bag and pulled out a gun, pointing it directly at me. Chapter 10. My heart pounded. I couldn't breathe. Babs and Betty were pointing a gun at me. Why? How? My only conclusion was that they murdered Lottie and I was getting too close. But if either of them did it, I couldn't be further from figuring it out. The only remotely suspicious thing about them was the fact that they acted like one person. This didn't make sense. All of this went through my mind in a heartbeat. My eyes never left the black metal directed at my head. Babs clucked her tongue. "Come on, you can't just point a gun at someone. You'll frighten the poor dear half to death." "She needed to see it," Betty retorted. "Besides, it's not loaded. We didn't even bring the clip." When my brain finally caught up to what they were saying, a huge breath escaped me. I counted the first 10 elements of the periodic table to calm down. "Hold on. So you weren't going to kill me?" "Of course not," Babs said. "You think we're killers?" "I have no idea who the killer is," I said. "All I know is that Lottie didn't kill herself. We asked you two to look into it. You don't appear to take anything seriously, and suddenly you're waving a gun around like you're Bonnie and Clyde. Plus, one of you has a recent scratch on her hand. What should I think?" "Young people," Betty said. "You watch too much television. All that Net Plus, or whatever you call it, is going to rot your brain." "I'm getting a master's in biology," I protested. "And you pointed a gun at me." "She's right about that," Babs said. "The scratch is from our new kitten. Nothing to do with Lottie." "Why didn't you say that when Karen asked?" She shrugged. "We like to mess with her." "Anyway, this is Lottie's gun. We thought you could—" Betty wiggled her fingers in a way that implied she wanted me to have a vision using the gun, although how she knew about my powers was beyond me, not to mention how she smuggled evidence out of the police station. "You're white as a ghost," Betty said. "Didn't Connie tell you?" "She said something about you two being unique," I said weakly. "Are you witches?" "Mystics," Babs said. "We have our powers, but can't do general magic or spells. I happen to be rather skilled at hypnosis. It's handy for getting people to tell me things like where evidence is stored and exactly how to locate it." "You can't steal evidence from the police," I gasped, completely ignoring that one time I did the exact same thing. "I mean, I'm grateful, but we're not keeping it," Betty said. "We only brought it to you for a reading. My talent is in memory manipulation, but I can't make the entire police department forget a gun existed. It needs to go back. This seemed less risky than smuggling you into the station." "When did Mom tell you about me?" Babs said. "She called the day you told her about your visions. We've been anxiously awaiting your visit for ages." Connie said you'd be thrilled to meet us, Betty said. Something about doing experiments, but not in a creepy way.
I'd love to interview you when I'm ready to write my dissertation, I said. But that's ages away. I haven't started my PhD yet.
How does it work? Betty asked, holding the gun out to me, this time butt first. Connie said you need to use the object. You don't need to shoot it, do you? We didn't bring bullets.
Absolutely not, I assured her, wiping my damp palms on my thighs before taking it. After finding the gun in Lottie's room, my fingerprints were already on it. I wasn't terribly concerned with adding more. The gun felt lighter than expected, but Betty said the clip had been removed. Every piece of a gun added to the weight. Sure enough, when I looked where I thought the bullets went, I didn't see whatever I was supposed to see in a loaded gun. Just in case, I checked the safety to make sure it was on. I had no intention of squeezing the trigger, but I didn't want to take chances. Closing my eyes, I inhaled slowly and pictured Lottie in her bedroom. Turning so I faced away from the twins, I wrapped both hands around the handle of the gun and lifted it. The amphitheater dissolved. Someone screamed. I couldn't see who. I stood beside Lottie's bed. The light coming through the blinds on the eastern-facing window told me it was still morning. The bedside table contained only the lamp, no note. My right hand felt weird. Looking down, I realized it was shaking. I wore black gloves on slender hands with long fingers and no visible jewelry. My view shifted downward. Whoever held the gun was crouching. My eyes squeezed shut, avoiding the scene on the carpet. My heart pounded in my chest. The only sounds in the room were deep, gasping breaths, but I couldn't tell who made them. Finally, the killer opened their eyes and placed the gun on the carpet beside Lottie. I searched frantically for any clue as to the person's identity. At the edge of my vision, a piece of black fabric. Could have been a coat, pants, or skirt, no way to tell. Then the killer shifted and a shoe tip entered my vision. A white, rounded rubber sole with a black stripe along the front. A rubber sole with Lottie's blood on it. Before I could figure out what kind of shoe it was or who it belonged to, the killer let go of the gun and the vision ended. Once again, I stood in the meadow before the stage. Babs and Betty gazed at me with rapt fascination. "What did you see?" the twins chorused. Before answering, I gave the gun back to them. I didn't want the thing anywhere near me. Then I took a deep breath, collecting my thoughts. Lottie didn't kill herself. Someone planted the gun beside her. Chapter 11. The twins gasped as one. Betty said, "I knew we were looking for the truth, but I didn't want to believe anyone helping create such a magical festival was capable of murder." "What makes you think it was someone working on the jamboree?" Babs asked her. "Did you see the killer's face?" "No, but they knew enough to take the path that connects the campsite to the fairground, avoiding the security cameras," I said. "It couldn't have been a stranger to the area." "They were comfortable in Lottie's bedroom," Betty added. "No one mentioned anything about Lottie interrupting a robbery. She didn't have a stalker that we know of. Why would a stranger go into her home?" They turned toward me with hope written on their faces. "A robber would probably bring their own gun, and most wouldn't bother to stage a suicide. They'd want to get out fast. When Mom and I got to the RV this morning, it looked lived in, but not ransacked. We need to find someone with a grudge against Lottie." "Did the energy in your vision feel male or female?" Babs asked. I shook my head. "It doesn't work like that. I was inside the person's mind, but I felt like me. Someone was breathing hard. The only thing I can say is that they seemed so upset. It doesn't feel like they planned Lottie's death. Too much shock." "Did the breathing sound male or female?" Betty asked. "It sounded panicked," I said. "Could have been anyone." Earlier this year, I tried to learn how to discover the identity of a vision subject, but the only time it worked was with someone I'd known well.
maybe someday. Can you tell us anything? Babs asked. After glancing again at their red footwear, I decided to trust them. Other than my understandable moment of panic, neither twin had given me reason to suspect them, and they'd risked a lot bringing me the murder weapon. The killer was wearing shoes with a white toe. They kind of looked like Chuck Taylor's, but I couldn't see much. I also saw black fabric, like maybe a coat. Who's Chuck Taylor, and why would anyone be wearing his shoes? Babs asked. Don't be ridiculous, Betty said, elbowing her. It's another name for Converse. Oh, Converse, why didn't you say so? Everyone's got those. A black coat, too. Men, women, children, everyone. No one has any imagination. What about the custom shoes? Betty asked. Those take some creativity. She didn't say they were custom, now did she? The twins turned toward me expectantly. I shook my head. I didn't see enough to tell. Does Clint own a pair? He was wearing cowboy boots when I saw him. I've never noticed one way or the other. We'll keep an eye out, Betty said. Now we need to get the gun back to the police station. What about the rest of the merry maids? I asked, checking the time on my phone. We're supposed to meet them in a few minutes. We'll be back, Babs said over her shoulder. I wanted to protest the two of them leaving now, but none of us could afford to get caught holding the murder weapon after the police had taken it into evidence. Then a thought occurred to me. Wait! They paused, and I jogged over to them. One of you said you know hypnosis. The police think this was a suicide. Can you convince them to investigate? Use your powers? Betty nodded. We'll try. That was one reason we brought you the gun. Connie was so sure Lottie hadn't killed herself, but we didn't have solid proof. My visions aren't admissible in court. You can't use them to get the police to give more attention to the case. Maybe not, but now we can plant the idea in an officer's head that this isn't as simple as it looks at first blush, Betty said. Unless you can find the killer and get them to confess, it's our best shot. It was better than nothing. I thanked them again and walked them to the parking lot, where they drove away in an old Volkswagen bus with Van Gogh's Starry Night painted on the side. What a fascinating pair. On my way back inside, I found Anne. She narrowed her eyes when I approached. What are you doing here? I thought you were staying near the stage and talking to people. There's no one there, I said, taking a peek at her shoes. While I didn't have any reason to think she'd been involved in Lottie's death, might as well check everyone. Blue running shoes. Very dirty, very well worn. No white, and not a speck of blood. We think whoever killed Lottie snuck over from the fairground through the woods. There's got to be video footage of this entrance, so I was looking for someone who could get it for me. I also hoped they might have a log of visitors and deliveries. Anne smiled. Great minds think alike. That's where I came from. Any luck? No visitor's log. With so many people coming and going, maintaining it would be more trouble than it's worth. For the most part, this place doesn't need to monitor access. Deliveries are accepted at the front. Nothing this morning, unfortunately. Mail and packages typically arrive in the afternoon. Another dead end. I tried to hide my disappointment. What about video cameras? The ones at the front gate will be turned on tomorrow morning. Anne sighed. Right now, there's not much to look at. Anyone could have wandered in if they acted like they belonged. Would anyone know they could get to Lottie's place by cutting through the woods? Most of the workers do, I'm sorry to say. You think it was someone from the festival? She shook her head. It's so hard to believe. I've known most of the people who work here for years. We walked back toward the stage to meet the other merry maids and discuss our findings. When we passed the now almost fully decorated Christmas tree, I checked for June, but she was gone. I hadn't seen her since our awkward conversation. It seemed odd that she'd lied about how much she loved working for Lottie, then disappeared. As near as I can tell, Anne said as we walked, we need to look at the people who benefit from Lottie's death.
For half a second, I wondered if she'd read my mind. The most obvious suspect is June. She gets Lottie's job now, right? They can't hire someone else before tomorrow, even if they want to. Don't forget the fat bonus check that comes with the title, Anne said. But if June wanted to kill her boss and steal her job, she's smart enough not to do it in the middle of a workday. People see them together constantly, and if they both disappeared for long, someone would notice. Maybe she didn't expect anyone to investigate, I pointed out. The scene was staged to look like a suicide. The police bought it. Why wouldn't everyone else? Good point. June is a master of staging things. When I'd seen June earlier, I hadn't paid attention to her outfit. We needed to look at her shoes. Who else? How did Lottie's bosses feel about her dating an employee? Anne shook her head. They're never on site before opening day. If one of them showed up, it would cause a commotion. Everyone would bend over backwards to suck up to them. People 3 counties over would have heard about it. Besides, you don't kill the cash cow that feeds you. We're talking about who will benefit from Lottie's death. Her bosses had a lot to lose. First, she's by far the biggest fundraiser they have. Second, if a hint of murder at the jamboree gets out, it could destroy the event. That's a lot of money down the drain. Do you think it was Clint? The very talkative guy who drives the train said he heard Clint and Lottie arguing this morning. Between you and me, I don't think he has it in him. Being unfaithful to your wife doesn't make someone a killer. His wife is Tony's sister, right? I asked. Could she have come here under the pretense of visiting and then snuck over to Lottie's? She wouldn't need the pretense, Anne said. Maureen works here. We all do in some capacity. June works for Lottie. Karen manages IT and ticket sales. Tony operates a funnel cake stand. Babs and Betty run a very popular fortune-telling booth. Anyway, Maureen works in the stables. She was there all morning, overseeing the reindeer delivery. Since we knew the killer most likely got to Lottie's campsite through the fairground, hearing that Clint's wife worked here pushed her a couple of spots up the suspect list. Did she know her husband was cheating on her? Anne shrugged as we arrived back at the amphitheater. It wasn't my business. Come on, let's see what everyone else found out. You go ahead, I'm going to call my mom. Anne went ahead and I pulled out my phone. Mom answered immediately, her voice trembling. She assured me that she was on her way back to the fairground now. Alexa was at work all morning. I talked to her boss and he confirmed it. But after talking to her, I feel terrible for even feeling the need to eliminate her as a suspect. Alexa loved her mom. She wasn't thrilled with Lottie dating a married man, but listen to this, Mom said. Apparently, Lottie called her this morning and told her it was over. She was going to call things off with Clint. I think he killed her. I'm not so sure about that. Quickly, I explained the gift Babs and Betty brought me and the vision it inspired. Clint was wearing cowboy boots when we saw him, and the killer definitely wasn't. If he planned to kill her, he might have changed out of his work clothes first, Mom said. By this time, Karen had returned to the clearing. She waited behind me to make a show of tapping her watch. I nodded to let her know I was aware of the time and gestured for her to go on ahead. She continued to stare at me. Mom, I gotta go. The other Merry Maids are here and we need to compare notes. On my way to join the others, I checked out everyone's feet. Karen sported casual shoes similar to Anne's, but bright orange, much better for running all over the fairgrounds than my flip-flops. Gretchen wore rubber rain boots, which seemed odd when there wasn't a cloud in the sky, but I wasn't in any position to judge. She could have put them on if her regular shoes got blood on them, but she didn't have a motive. June entered a couple of minutes after Gretchen, clutching a clipboard and very out of breath. She wore black dress shoes that matched her business casual attire. Leaning over, I nudged Anne and lowered my voice. June wasn't here earlier. How did she know about this meeting? Gretchen told her. She said it was fair that June know we were discussing her as a suspect. Alerting her was only a good idea if June hadn't killed Lottie. If she did, it was downright dangerous to let her know we suspected her. I prayed someone had information to lead me in a better direction than checking out everyone's feet. But as I thought that, I realized not everyone had arrived. "Where's Tony?" I asked. June's phone rang. She stepped away to take the call. "Still talking to her sister," Anne said. "If anyone had a reason to want Lottie dead," Gretchen's voice trailed off. "Would she really rat out her own sister?" I asked. Maybe sending Tony wasn't the best idea. "I went with her, remember?" Anne said. "Maureen was in the barn when Lottie died. She arrived around 7 o'clock to make sure everything was ready for the reindeer. Lottie was with her for a few minutes after that. We've got camera footage. Maureen doesn't remember speaking to them about anything personal. She said nothing unusual happened. Lottie looked over the reindeer. They discussed the timing for Santa's sleigh rides and the petting zoo. And then she left." June returned for about 12 seconds before her phone rang again. Maybe I didn't need to worry about her hearing our conversation after all. "Could Maureen have followed her home?" I asked. Karen shook her head. "We've got her on video at the barn for more than an hour after their conversation ended. I checked the whole thing after Anne and Tony talked to her. Maureen had the strongest motive, but she can't physically have been in the RV with Lottie." I sighed. Well, that's one down. Did anyone else find out anything? "Clint also popped into the barn briefly," Karen said. "He's on the tapes too." June tapped several times before stuffing her phone in her pocket and coming back over. "Sorry, everyone. I know some of you think Clint killed Lottie, but you forget. I heard them talking all the time. Lottie and I spent hours together every day. Clint worshipped her." "He was at the scene of the crime," Anne countered. "Said after he made sure the reindeer were settled, he went straight to Lottie's motorhome, where he found you and your mom." "Yeah, but he only admits being there after Lottie died," I said. Gretchen said, "Doesn't mean he wasn't there before. He could have gone over, killed Lottie, left, then gone back. Maybe he wanted to find the body to clear suspicion from himself." Since Mom and I initially thought the same thing, I didn't immediately discount her theory. "We don't have a time of death. When did Clint leave the stables? Could he have done it?" "It's tight," Karen said. "Technically, I think it's literally possible for him to have done it. But there's no room for error. He had about 3 extra minutes. If anyone stopped him to say hello, if he tripped over a root, or she pleaded with him." Gretchen said, "Darn it, you're right." To me, time was relative. A little over a year ago, a witch trapped me in a loop, forcing me to repeat the same day over and over. Without knowing who we were dealing with, it was possible that Clint killed Lottie. But my inner scientist knew we couldn't build a theory around someone teleporting to the campground. "Does he by any chance possess the ability to move extremely quickly?" June snorted. "Quite the opposite. I'm always nagging him to hurry up." Newton, help me. We were running out of suspects. Maybe we should start over. Other than Karen, who saw Lottie this morning? Maybe if we piece together all the sightings, someone will remember a clue we missed. Anne put one arm around my shoulders. "I pulled into the parking lot around 9 o'clock. Went straight to the office to collect Karen and Lottie on my way to the stage. Karen was the only one there. We talked for a few minutes, waiting to see if Lottie would show before walking down here. Did either of you call her?" "We both did. No answer. Karen called June at one point, too, before calling your mom. She didn't know anything. Then we left for rehearsal. On the way, we ran into Tony, Babs, and Betty coming from the back of the lot. When Lottie didn't show up, I called again. Then Karen called your mom. We thought something was wrong, but we had no idea Lottie had been killed." "What about you?" I asked June. "Do you report to Lottie when you arrive in the morning?" She laughed, a humorless sound. "This close to the festival, by the time I get in my car to drive here, we've talked about 6 times. Motive and opportunity. How did she seem? It's the day before the event starts. She was busy, stressed, and excited, June said. I certainly didn't hang up the phone and think, I bet she's going to go home and kill herself. Did you ever visit her in the RV? Not during work hours. If I need something, I drop by her office or we meet at the fairground. June narrowed her eyes. What are you getting at? Nothing, I said quickly. It seemed like out of everyone, you might know where she was right before she died. Well, I don't, June said, crossing her arms. She dumped a ton of work on me, and I was busy. I'm not her babysitter. Besides, if I'd killed her, I would want everyone to think it was Clint. Before things could escalate, the twins returned. As desperately as I wanted to find the killer, I welcomed the interruption. This wasn't the way to find out if June had been involved. Now we could both get some space to calm down. Welcome back, Karen stood up. What do you know? The police are willing to listen if we find more evidence, Betty said. It's the best we could do. Karen frowned and shook her head. Let's run through the song. I know everyone feels terrible, but we still have to perform. Lottie would want the show to go on. Can you fill in for your mom? Karen asked me. Just for right now. We're still one short, I said, glad to have an excuse handy. Tony's not back yet. Anne held up her phone, revealing a notification. She'll be here in about 30 seconds. Nice try, though. Betrayed by the bell, I muttered. Fine, but I warn you now, I can't sing. We just want a warm body, Anne assured me. If you know the words to the song, that's enough. You can even speak them. I grumbled until Tony, in her navy shoes, arrived, but dutifully took my place on the stage once the rehearsal started. Maybe my mind could work out who killed Lottie while my body followed the steps. We were wrapping up when Mom finally appeared on the far side of the clearing. Her eyes were still red, and, if possible, she looked even worse than when we'd found Lottie. I went to her side immediately. What happened? Alexa called me again, Mom sobbed. Given their relationship, I could only imagine one thing Alexa could have said to have put that look on Mom's face. The police refused to reconsider the case, didn't they? She nodded. Not if we have anything to say about it, Babs and Betty said. We planted a seed in the detectives' minds. Give it a few days to flourish. We don't have a few days. The police told Alexa she can have her mother transferred to a funeral parlor. She's planning to have Lottie cremated so she can hold a service. Chapter 12. At Mom's announcement, the rest of the group gasped. We'd been working so hard to find the killer, and we needed more time. She can't do that. The police need Lottie's body to figure out who killed her. There might be a clue, fibers, or a hair from the killer, anything. Yes, I'd been watching a lot of crime scene dramas recently. My boyfriend loved them. I know, and I agree, but the police don't. They're going to release Lottie tomorrow afternoon. Did you explain why we need more time? I asked. I tried. I really did, Mom said. Alexa said, as much as it hurts to believe, her mother was unhappy in her relationship. For her, the note seals it. She thinks Lottie was despondent over breaking up with Clint. She's meeting with the funeral director on Friday morning. The note we found on Lottie's stationery? I injected as much meaning into those words as possible without shouting out my powers. I told her about your theory. She caught my eyes and held them, letting me know she'd given Alexa the whole truth. Although I usually kept my abilities secret, sometimes people needed to know. She said it doesn't make a difference. My heart sank. Today was Wednesday. We barely had 24 hours to solve a murder while ensuring the Holly Jolly Jamboree went ahead as planned. What are we going to do?
Let's take our shot, Mom said. We'll go back to the police station and unload everything we know. Sorry, ladies, I announced to the group, but you'll have to practice without us. Mom and I have to help Lottie. Karen clapped. Don't worry about the show. We'll be ready. Betty and Babs nudged each other and chuckled. Go get 'em. All the way to the police station, Mom and I practiced what we would say. We discussed how to convey that we had important information about the case without revealing how we got it and without making them think one of us was involved. Normally, the scientific method helped us think better, but we kept rejecting one hypothesis after the next. This was a delicate situation, and the stakes were too high to risk messing it up. You could lie, I said, out of pure frustration. Tell them Lottie told you she was breaking up with Clint and he was mad about it. Do you really want them to investigate Clint when you think he's innocent? I want them to investigate, period, I muttered. If they're any good at their jobs, they'll figure out it wasn't him. You know that's not fair to him or the police, or really the taxpayers who ultimately foot the bill. Besides, they'd ask why I didn't mention it earlier, she said. They'd never believe I didn't think an angry ex-lover was important, especially when he was standing right there to be questioned. With a sigh, I looked out the window and kept thinking. We arrived at the station too soon. Mom waited in the car while I went inside. The donuts I'd noticed earlier were still sitting out. Detective Cooper offered me one, but I passed. Can we speak privately? She ushered me into an interview room. What can I do for you? First, I explained Lottie's affair with Clint and someone catching them together that morning. She listened with her hands folded, watching my face without taking notes. I told her Xander overheard them arguing. When I finished, I pulled the scrap of paper out of my pocket, setting it on the table. That note we found at Lottie's place wasn't a suicide note. She was writing a breakup letter. Whoever killed her stole the top page and left the rest. Look, it's the same stationery. Detective Cooper leaned forward, studying the note. I held my breath. Finally, she said, It's similar. I can't say it's an exact match. Hard to tell without seeing more. Do you have the rest of the note? I shook my head. This says Pryrate Foe. What does that mean to you? It's ripped. I pointed out the edges unnecessarily. This is part of not appropriate for... Lottie was saying that she and Clint shouldn't see each other anymore because she's his boss. She tilted her head at me. How do you know that? My mind raced. Part of me hoped that if I kept talking long enough, eventually the hypnotic suggestion Betty placed, or was it Babs, would take hold and she'd be inspired to help. I have a pretty good vocabulary, and there aren't a lot of words that end in "priet." I took that information and extrapolated from what I know. You guessed, then. I reached an educated conclusion based on the known facts. Scientists do that all the time. It's not guessing. Maybe not in the lab, but at the police station it is, she said. All this tells us is that Lottie wrote more than one draft of her suicide note. Without the whole page, we can't tell what it would have said. You could fingerprint it? Yes, we could. If we were investigating a murder, we would fingerprint it. With a sigh, she slid her chair back and stood up. Look, I'm very sorry for your loss. I know how hard it is when someone close to you dies. But you've got to stop. This isn't healthy. And I've got other cases to investigate. Real crimes to solve. Go home. Get a good night's sleep. And try to enjoy the Holly Jolly Jamboree. I'd hate for the whole thing to be ruined for you. The festival had been ruined the second Lottie died, and it made me angry that Detective Cooper didn't understand. Tears of frustration filled my eyes as I put the scrap back in my pocket. She wasn't going to listen. If I told her I was psychic, she'd probably lock me up. Why didn't she want to do her job? When I was halfway down the hall leading to the exit, the front door opened, and another officer walked in. He was smiling, carrying a newspaper close to his chest. "Cooper, you gotta see this." "Not now, officer." He barely glanced at me. "It's okay, this isn't police stuff. Check it out. Front page of the Metro section. The chief was at some swanky fundraiser for the city on Monday. Look at him, hobnobbing with the richest people in town." The officer laughed to himself, thrilled with his discovery. I met Detective Cooper's eyes, and the blood drained out of her face. "Yeah, he says it's the worst part of the job. Listen, Allie, thanks for coming in." "May I see that?" I held out my hand. Detective Cooper's reaction left me needing to know more. The newspaper article showed a local event at a nearby hotel I'd never be able to afford. In the front page image, a man in full police regalia stood talking to a couple. According to the caption, it was the chief of police and the heads of the foundation that ran the Holly Jolly Jamboree. The headline read, "Are new police cars coming?" Curious, I skimmed the first column. According to the article, the people who ran the festival made a generous donation to local law enforcement each year. A source who spoke on the conditions of anonymity told this reporter that the money isn't a thank you. The foundation wants to make sure everything runs smoothly at the event itself and is rumored to pay officers who work the event 5-figure bonuses. The article continued, but the rest didn't matter. Everything clicked into place. During my time in Shady Grove, I'd become very familiar with public corruption. I was disappointed not to have guessed what was going on sooner. The police department's unwillingness to investigate should have been a giveaway. "Can you excuse us for a minute?" Detective Cooper asked. I wasn't sure if she was talking to me or the officer. Before either of us could answer, she took the paper and shoved it back at him. Then she grabbed my elbow and steered me down the hall. "So that's why you won't investigate?" I hissed at Detective Cooper. "Because the people running the festival don't want anyone to know Lottie was murdered less than 500 feet from the entrance?" "I'm sorry, but this is out of my hands," she whispered. "There's nothing I can do. They don't want the bad PR. We can call the newspaper and tell this reporter what happened." He'd never get the article up in time. And besides, an unnamed source in the newspaper article is double hearsay. The DA won't hang his reputation on that. Even with public pressure, I need something we can't ignore, like a confession. Then maybe after the festival ends, we can do some digging. What if I call the DA and explain what we know? They'd never talk to you, and I'd probably get fired. But she held up a hand and raised her voice. "Go home, Allie. The case is closed." Chapter 13. The next morning, things didn't look any better. Lottie was still dead. I knew someone murdered her, but I didn't have evidence admissible in regular people court. The police refused to investigate. Alexa was meeting with the funeral director tomorrow morning, and once Lottie was cremated, it would be too late to get forensic evidence from her. Without DNA, it would be very difficult to tie anyone to the scene of the crime. No matter how you looked at it, I'd failed Lottie and my mother. If the police would only investigate, they could find the killer. They had more resources, more experience, and better scientific equipment at their disposal than me and 8 random women, none of whom had investigative experience. The coroner should be able to determine the angle of the bullet, how close the gun was when it went off, whether Lottie had gunshot residue on her hands, and whether anyone else left DNA at the crime scene. Mom and I couldn't learn those things, not even with the help of 7 other merry maids. For a brief, hysterical moment, I considered asking Babs and Betty to steal Lottie's remains from the coroner's office. It wasn't my worst idea. We ate breakfast in silence, then got ready for the Holly Jolly Jamboree. The gates opened at 10, and the not-so-merry maids
had shows scheduled throughout the day. Although I told Mom no one would blame her if she dropped out, she insisted Lottie would want her to go ahead with the performance. Instead of arguing, I drove. The fairground looked amazing. A lot had been done after we left yesterday. Garland hung between the trees, and the fresh fake snow made everything look Christmassy. The Christmas tree designers had turned a plain old evergreen tree into an artistic masterpiece. I squeezed Mom's hand. Lottie would have loved this. It's beautiful. I told you so, she said, forcing a smile. Hand in hand, we walked silently to the stage where most of the other maids had gathered. We'd barely finished exchanging hellos when Karen barreled into the clearing. "Come on, people, let's go, let's go, let's go!" Her claps punctuated her words. "Move it or lose it." "We all got here before you," Anne pointed out. "Shush and get on stage," Karen said. "We still need to get into costume, and I want to talk to everyone first. Gather round." Everyone except me moved into place. I sat on a white folding chair set up after Mom and I left yesterday. Maybe I should get everyone some hot cocoa while they prepared. "Oh, wow!" Babs or Betty exclaimed, making me turn to see what she was looking at. "Your shoes look good as new." She stood with Tony, who gazed at her toes as if the secret to the meaning of life was written on them. "Yeah, I washed them. Would you believe I stepped in a mud puddle?" My ears perked up. Who washed their shoes? "I thought it was dog poop," Anne said, making me spin around to investigate. "Isn't that what you said yesterday?" When I met her, Tony had been wearing a pair of navy ballet flats. These were entirely different. Rainbow-striped lace-up sneakers with white soles, rounded white rubber on the front, outlined in a black stripe. I'd seen that shoe before. "It was you!" The words escaped me before I could question the wisdom of uttering them. Tony kept walking as if she didn't hear me. I followed her onto the stage and tried again, louder. "You killed Lottie!" A gasp rippled through the maids. Anne laughed. "Allie, you can't accuse people of murder." "Her shoes," I blurted out. "The person who killed Lottie was wearing Chuck Taylors exactly like those." "How could you possibly know that?" June asked. "You saw me yesterday," Tony said kindly. "My shoes were navy." Karen stepped forward. "I thought it was weird, with all the walking we do in the days leading up to the festival. Most people opt for comfort. June has to look nice because she deals with the donors. But not you. Plus, the navy didn't match your black pants." How she noticed these details was beyond me, but I was grateful for the support. "Allie, are you sure?" Anne asked. "Positive." "Lots of people have shoes like these," Tony said. "They've been popular since I was in high school, maybe longer." "How many of them confronted Lottie before she died?" Clint asked from the grass. We all turned to look at him. Hatred filled Tony's face. "Don't you talk to me, you cheater!" "Was Tony the one who walked in on you and Lottie?" I asked him. He nodded. "She left so quickly I wasn't sure, but yes. After we spoke, Xander told me Tony'd been looking for me yesterday morning." "Don't be ridiculous. You were in a relationship with Lottie?" Tony's face was bright red. "Nice try," I said. "You just called him a cheater." She lifted her head to look down her nose at me. "I don't have to listen to this. Do the show without me. Good luck explaining why you only have 7 maids a-milking." A woman stepped out from behind Clint. I'd never seen her before, but everyone else seemed to recognize her. "Yesterday, when you and Anne came to see me, I thought you were behaving oddly. I chalked it up to the stress of losing Lottie. You seemed almost angry she died, but now I see. It was guilt." When she spoke, I realized we were looking at Clint's wife, Maureen. "I didn't do anything," Tony insisted. "Maybe not." I said. The certainty provided by my visions gave me courage. Then you won't mind taking a lie detector test. Lie detectors were terrible science, but most people didn't realize that. Your ordinary citizen was terrified of taking a polygraph if they had anything to hide.
That's absurd. You have no reason to ask me that,
Tony declared. A fairground security officer approached the stage out of Tony's line of sight. When I caught her eye, she pointed to another officer approaching from behind and barely nodded toward a third moving through the grass. Someone must have called them. They had the stage surrounded. If we could get a confession in front of all these people, the police would have to arrest Tony. Crossing my fingers behind my back, I told a white lie. We saw you on Lottie's doorbell camera. Tony choked.
No, Clint killed her because she dumped him.
She didn't, he said.
She'd been thinking about it, but we decided to work things out.
That note we found was for you, I told him. It wasn't a suicide note. He shook his head.
I should have realized. After our conversation, I should have known, but I was in shock.
Why were you with Babs and Betty yesterday morning? Anne asked.
What do you mean?
They arrived at the fairground together, as usual. They showed up early to wrap the gifts that went under the tree. You were with them when we all met up, though. And you don't have any reason to be over there. The food stands are clear on the other side of the event.
It's over, Tony, I said. The police are here. We've told them everything. Clint knows you caught him and Lottie together, and we know you went to the RV to confront her. She glanced behind me, then toward the doors, before deflating. Upon realizing she wasn't going to escape, she hung her head. It was an accident, she finally said.
How do you accidentally shoot someone with their own gun? I asked.
You don't understand. I've known Lottie for 20 years. When Clint married Maureen, she was a bridesmaid. She practically organized the entire wedding. I couldn't believe she would betray us like that. We were family. And you, Tony sneered at Clint, do your wedding vows mean nothing? He heaved a sigh. My vows meant a lot to me. I'm not perfect, and neither is your sister.
Maureen spoke up.
Tony, we separated a few months ago. We were planning to tell everyone after the new year, once the festival was behind us.
Tony went pale.
How could you not tell me? I would never...
What happened yesterday morning? I prodded. The last I'd heard, she'd run from the ticket booth after catching Clint and Lottie together. Even with my visions, I didn't know how that caused Lottie's death.
After I walked in on Lottie and Clint, I took off, ran for a bit, getting my head together, thinking about how much this would hurt my sister, Tony said. Once I calmed down, I called Lottie, told her we needed to talk face to face and to meet me at her RV so we could have some privacy. Then I hung up.
No one had found Lottie's phone, which meant we'd never have known about that call unless there had been another reason to suspect Tony. The police certainly wouldn't pull the records.
When I got to her RV, Lottie told me she was planning to end it with Clint. She even showed me a letter she wrote, but she changed her mind before giving it to him. I took the letter and read it. It had some beautiful language in it. I can't go on like this, blah, blah. You took the rest of the letter, Mom said. You killed her and planted the second page so we'd think she killed herself. Not at first. I tried to reason with her, Tony said. Convince her to break things off, you know? She laughed in my face, said I was jealous that Clint picked her over me. I told her to tell Maureen the truth or I would. She said if I did that, she'd tell my sister I was in love with her husband. She had the nerve to say if I didn't leave her home, she'd shoot me. I was so mad I couldn't even think. I grabbed the nearest object and threw it at her. Suddenly, I remembered Lottie's snow globe collection, showing 11 of the 12 days of Christmas. They were heavy,
At the time, I'd thought she hadn't finished her collection. The missing snow globe. You hit her with it. I didn't mean to kill her. It was the closest thing, and I grabbed blindly. I wanted to hurt her like she was hurting my sister. We were all friends, you know? How could she do that? She closed her eyes and shook her head as if trying to erase the memory. When she opened them, a tear leaked out. When the bass hit Lottie, the sound was so loud. She fell backward. Her head hit the edge of the table. "Why didn't you call an ambulance?" Mom asked, her question barely a whisper. "Why didn't you try to save her?" "It was too late. She was gone in an instant. Then, I don't know. I panicked. No one would believe it was an accident. My life flashed before my eyes. I didn't know what to do." "Calling 911 would have been a good option," Anne said. "It was too late. If Clint told the police what happened, they'd arrest me. I knew she kept a gun in the glove box, so I pulled on a pair of her gloves to avoid leaving prints, and She swallowed hard before continuing. "Then I put the note on the nightstand, took the first page, tossed the broken snow globe, and left. I'm so sorry." "Killing someone in the heat of passion is still a crime," Detective Cooper said, stepping onto the stage. "Antoinette Williams, you're under arrest." No one said a word while Detective Cooper arrested Tony, explained her rights, and took her away. When they moved out of sight, Mom fell into my arms and sobbed. Not knowing what else to do, I held her and stroked her hair. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry, baby. You solved it. I'm so proud of you." Anne stepped forward and cleared her throat. "At the risk of sounding insensitive, the gates are opening soon." A glance at the clock told me we had less than 10 minutes. "What are you going to do? Tony is gone and Mom is in no condition to perform." At that, Mom stood upright and wiped her eyes, sniffling. "Don't be ridiculous. The show must go on. I'll be fine." "Can you do the show with 7? When she beamed at me, I spluttered. "No way. I'm not performing. I love Lottie too much to desecrate her memory." "Lottie loved your voice." Mom met my eyes in a way that told me she wasn't kidding. "She thought it was unique." "Unique like Kermit the Frog," Karen said. "Sing quietly and we'll carry you. You've seen the show before. I'm sure you'll remember the steps. It's pretty simple." "Lottie would want the show to go on," Mom said. A heavy sigh escaped me. It was the only thing she could have said to get me on stage. "Then I guess, unless milkmaids have started wearing athleisure, we better find me a costume." "There's a spare," Karen said. "You can change backstage." Since there was no way out of this with my dignity, I sighed and headed in the direction she pointed. When I came out of the makeshift dressing room, Anne waited for me. "Good work. I have a question, though. If you saw Tony on the doorbell camera right before Lottie died, why didn't you say so earlier? Why spend so much time looking at other suspects?" My cheeks grew warm. "I made it up. Lottie didn't have a doorbell camera, but I was positive Tony killed her, and I needed her to admit it." Anne let out a guffaw. "Oh, I knew I liked you. Come on, kid. Let's do this. For Lottie." "For Lottie," I agreed. Before we even made it halfway through Two Turtle Doves, Maureen pulled me off the stage. I started to protest, but she whispered, "It's okay, honey. We all have our strengths." Rather than argue, I smiled and took Maureen's now vacant seat at the end of the third row. She mounted the stage and joined the cast so gracefully, you'd have thought it part of the original plan. Mom caught my eye and winked. I waved at her. Oh well, I may be a terrible singer, but at least I caught Lottie's killer. This has been a production of Maids, a-Meddling, a Christmas novella. Shady Grove Psychic Mysteries, Book 9.5. Written by Ada Bell. Narrated by Liza Jacob. Copyright 2024 Ada Bell. All rights reserved.